Hey there, ready for another deep dive? Today we're going to be unpacking this paper called Generalized Fast Krasnosel'kĉi Method with Preconditioners.
Sounds a bit intimidating.
Yeah, it does. It's really all about, finding efficient ways to solve equations, particularly, in this mathematical space called a Hilbert space.
Right. And, we can think of this method as kind of like enhancing a classic method called the Krasnosel'kĉi method, making it faster, making it more versatile.
So like a turbo boost.
Yeah, exactly. Like giving it a turbo boost.
Okay, cool. So let's start with some basics then.
Sure.
This paper, it sets out to solve this thing called the fixed point problem, represented by the equation x equals t of x.
Right.
Can you walk us through what that means and why it matters?
Yeah. So a fixed point is basically, it's a value x.
Okay.
That doesn't change when you apply a particular function or an operator to it, which is denoted by t. It's kind of like finding the equilibrium point of a system.
Okay, got it.
And these fixed points, they pop up everywhere.
Yeah.
In a lot of mathematical problems, from solving equations, optimization problems, modeling dynamic systems.
So it's like finding that sweet spot where everything balances out.
Exactly.
Okay, so now the paper focuses on this type of operator called a non-expansive operator.
Right.
What's so special about that?
So non-expansive operators, basically, they don't increase the distances between points in the mathematical space. So in other words, they don't stretch or distort things too much.
Got it.
And this property is very useful when we are trying to find, design algorithms to find these fixed points.
So it's like they're this nice, gentle guide that's taking us to the solution.
Exactly.
Making sure we don't overshoot it or get lost on the way.
Exactly.
Cool. So for some context, this paper, it built on some previous work on accelerating these fixed point finding methods.
Yeah.
So you have methods like Nesterov's algorithm and FASTO-GDA. They're already pretty good at speeding things up. But this paper, it aims to kind of generalize them and improve them even further.
Exactly.
Okay, and that's where these flexible parameters, eta and sigma, come in. Right?
Exactly.
They give us more control over the acceleration process.
Yes.
So it's like fine-tuning the engine.
Part of our algorithm.
And the paper kind of dives into this with a continuous time system.
Okay.
Which is described by equation 2.1.
Okay, so this equation 2.1, it defines the second derivative of x with respect to time.
Right.
So it tells us, how the system's state represented by x changes over time.
Right.
But what's interesting is that the rate of change, it depends not only on the current state, x of t, but also on its first derivative, x prime of t.
Yes.
And the operator q applied to x of t. And these parameters, alpha, beta, and b, they're like the control knobs, that influence how these different factors contribute to the dynamics.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's like a feedback loop where...
the past and the present behavior influence the future trajectory of the system.
Right.
And these parameters, alpha, beta, and b, give us a way to kind of tune that feedback loop.
Got it.
And guide the system towards a fixed point.
Okay, I think I see the big picture, but then there's this growth condition for beta of t in equation 2.6. What's its role?
So that growth condition is crucial for ensuring that the energy of the system decreases over time.
Okay.
You can think of it as a constraint that prevents the system from spiraling out of control.
Okay, so it's like a safety mechanism to make sure the solution stays on track.
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
And this energy decrease is key to proving that the solution converges to a fixed point.
Okay.
And Theorem 2.2 kind of lays out those convergence guarantees.
Okay, so let's talk about Theorem 2.2.
Sure.
So it states that for any initial point x of 0 and x prime of 0, we have these two amazing results. It talks about the convergence of the solution trajectory x of t and the decay rate of the operator q applied to x of t. So this sets the stage for like the effectiveness of the entire method.
That's right. It gives us a mathematical guarantee that our method is on the right track, and it will eventually, lead us to the solution.
But it doesn't just say it will get there. It gives us like these rates of convergence.
It does. It does.
So can we talk about those a little bit?
Of course.
What are those telling us?
So the first part of the theorem describes, how quickly this quantity q of x of t shrinks towards 0 as time progresses. And it provides, different rates of convergence depending on the values of alpha and epsilon.
Right.
So, for instance, if alpha is greater than or equal to 2, and epsilon is positive, we get a specific rate of convergence.
Got it.
However, if alpha is strictly greater than 2 and epsilon is positive, we get an even faster rate of convergence, but under certain conditions.
So it's like we have different gears in our mathematical engine.
That's a great analogy.
Depending on the problem and the choice of parameters, we can kind of shift into a higher gear and reach the solution faster.
Precisely. And the second part of the theorem guarantees, this weak convergence of the trajectory x of t to a 0 of the operator q as time goes to infinity.
Right.
So essentially what it's saying is that, the solution path will approach a point where q of x equals 0.
Which is our fixed point that we're trying to find.
Exactly.
Okay. So now the paper mentions these little O rates of convergence.
Right.
Can you kind of shed some light on what those mean and why they matter?
Yeah, so the little o notation basically describes, the asymptotic behavior of a function. And in this context, what it means is that the actual convergence rate is even faster than certain benchmark rates. So it's kind of like saying our method is not just converging, but it's converging faster than you might expect.
So our mathematical car is not just reaching the finish line. It's accelerating across the finish line.
Exactly. And the proof of this part of the theorem is quite elegant.
Nice.
They use like a contradiction argument to establish these faster convergence rates.
Very cool.
It's a testament to careful mathematical reasoning.
Now, what about this special case in remark 2.3, where epsilon is exactly 0?
Yeah.
It seems to connect our second-order system to a simpler first-order one. And it even relates to the Halpern method.
You're right. When epsilon is 0, what we're essentially doing is removing this damping term from our system, which makes it less resistant to change.
Got it.
And this connects our second-order system to a first-order one with kind of a clever time scaling, which simplifies the dynamics.
Yeah.
And when alpha is greater than 1, then we are in the domain of the continuous time Halpern method, which is a very well-known method for finding fixed points.
So by tweaking that epsilon parameter, we can kind of like explore different types of systems and connect to other tools.
That's a great way to put it.
So it's like a Swiss Army knife of mathematical techniques.
Yeah.
And equation 2.15, it beautifully captures this connection. Shows that, when epsilon is 0 and alpha is greater than 1, the system generates trajectories that converge strongly to the projection of a specific point V onto the set of zeros of Q. So this strong convergence is really exciting because it guarantees that the solution will not only approach that fixed point, but will actually land on it.
Absolutely. Gives a very powerful convergence guarantee.
Okay, awesome. So let's move from the continuous world to the discrete one.
Sure.
Algorithm 1 introduces the generalized fast Krasnosel'kĉi Mann method, which is the discrete counterpart to our continuous time system.
Exactly.
How do we get from one to the other?
So it's all about discretization, which basically means approximating the continuous derivatives with finite differences. And by carefully choosing how we do this, we can transform the continuous time system into a series of discrete steps.
Got it.
That a computer can handle.
Okay, so it's like taking a smooth curve and approximating it with these series of connected straight lines.
Right.
But what's the significance of using like an implicit discretization scheme?
That's a great question. So unlike the explicit scheme that was proposed in the original FAST-OGDA paper, the implicit scheme that is used here leads to a numerical method that is actually implementable.
Got it.
It kind of avoids these certain numerical instabilities that can arise in the explicit scheme, making it a more robust choice.
So it's like we're choosing a more stable path to the destination, even though it might take a little bit more computational effort at each step.
And our choice of notation with the delta symbol for finite differences, it helps bridge the gap between the continuous and discrete representations.
Got it.
Making the analysis more intuitive and transparent.
Okay, cool. So remark 3.1 and 3.2. They connect this generalized method back to the original fast Krasnosel'kĉi Mann method. and the optimal Halpern method. So it's like we're tracing the lineage of our algorithm by showing how it's built on these previous approaches.
The parameters sigma and eta to specific values.
Right.
You know, we can recover the original FastKMM method.
Got it.
Which highlights, you know, the generality of our approach.
Right. And when alpha is set to 2, we connect to the optimal Halpern method.
Exactly.
Which showcases those deep links between all these different techniques.
It's amazing how, you know, with this specific choice of alpha, our method transforms into this momentum form.
Right. Of the optimal Halpern method.
Okay, cool. So now to analyze the convergence of algorithm 1.
Yeah.
The paper introduces this discrete time energy function in equation 3.8.
Right.
And it seems to mirror the energy function from the continuous case.
You're right. The discrete time energy function is carefully constructed to kind of capture the key elements of the system dynamics in a discrete form. And it helps us track how, you know, the system's energy evolves over the iterations of algorithm 1.
But there's a subtle difference, right?
There is.
This inner product term in equation 3.8, it's not guaranteed to be non-negative.
That's right.
Which is different from the continuous case.
Yes.
How do we deal with that?
So to make sure that the overall energy function remains non-negative, we kind of use this clever trick. We leverage the properties of firmly non-expansive operators to manipulate the terms in a way that guarantees the non-negativity. Okay, cool. And equation 3.9 shows that trick quite elegantly by using those properties of firmly non-expansive operators. It shows how that potentially negative term can be bounded by a positive term. And that makes sure that the overall energy function stays positive.
Exactly. It's like adding a safety net to our mathematical construction, making sure that our analysis holds up, even when we're dealing with, you know, these subtleties of a discrete time setting.
So now lemma 3.3 seems crucial for proving the convergence of algorithm 1.
It is.
It establishes this energy decrease inequality, showing that the system's energy goes down with each iteration.
It is a cornerstone of our convergence proof.
Okay.
Lemma 3.3 kind of carefully analyzes, you know, the changes in energy between consecutive iterations and provides a very detailed breakdown of the mechanisms that drive convergence.
So equation 3.0 captures the essence of this lemma.
Yes.
It shows that the energy at a given iteration is less than or equal to the energy at the previous iteration minus a positive term. But we need to carefully choose the value of lambda.
We do.
To make sure that the energy actually decreases.
That's right. And the choice of lambda depends on the parameters alpha and tk. And this connection between the discrete and continuous setting is very illuminating. Because, you know, the conditions we need on lambda and tk directly relate back to that growth condition for beta of t in the continuous time system.
Got it.
Emphasizing the parallels between the two.
So it's like we're ensuring that the discrete steps follow the general downhill trend of that continuous system.
We're not just taking random jumps. We're making sure that every step is bringing us closer to the solution.
And this careful analysis leads us to theorem 3.4.
Yes, it does.
Which provides the convergence guarantee for algorithm 1. So theorem 3.4. The grand finale of this section of our deep dive.
Yes.
It states that if the sequence of step sizes is square, summable, but not summable, then the sequence generated by algorithm 1 converges weakly to a fixed point of t.
That's right.
It's the culmination of all of our hard work.
Exactly.
And it provides that solid guarantee that our algorithm will converge to a solution.
It establishes this big O rate of convergence for the fixed point residual, showing that the distance between our iterates and the true fixed point decreases at a rate of k to the -1.
Got it.
And the theorem even outlines you know, summability properties for various sequences that are derived from the algorithm when alpha is greater than 2.
So those summability properties, they're like these mathematical constraints. That govern the long-term behavior of our algorithm.
Right.
And then we have those little O rates of convergence again. Which tell us that the algorithm is converging faster than certain benchmark rates.
Exactly.
It's like it's super efficient.
Precisely. And the proof leverages the properties of the energy function.
Yeah,
and, they employ this clever contradiction argument to establish these faster rates.
That's awesome.
And it's a beautiful example of how careful mathematical analysis can reveal hidden performance boosts in our algorithms.
So this has been an incredibly insightful journey so far.
Yeah.
We explored the continuous time system, its discretization, and the convergence guarantees of algorithm 1.
We did.
I'm eager to see where this takes us next.
I agree. We're just getting started.
Cool.
And there's much more to uncover as we explore the application of these ideas to splitting methods with preconditioners.
Sounds good.
All right. So now let's shift our focus to section 4.
Right.
Where the authors apply these powerful results to something called splitting methods. And these splitting methods, they are all about breaking down complex problems into smaller, more manageable pieces that are easier to solve.
So it's like a divide and conquer strategy.
Exactly.
In the mathematical world.
So if we have like a big jigsaw puzzle, we divide it into sections.
Right.
And then we try to put those together.
Exactly.
Okay.
And in this context, we encounter the concept of preconditioners, which are represented by this matrix M.
Okay.
And these preconditioners are kind of like clever transformations that can reshape our problem into a form that's easier to solve.
Got it.
So, imagine you're trying to untangle a knotted rope.
Yeah.
A preconditioner would be like applying some lubricant to loosen the knots.
Okay.
And make the untangling process a lot smoother.
So it's like we're adding a special tool to our mathematical toolbox to make those problems a little bit easier.
And this section really highlights the power of this preconditioned resolvent, which is denoted by JM1A.
Right.
Which elegantly combines...
the resolvent of an operator with the preconditioning matrix?
Okay, so let's break down equation 4.1.
Sure.
It introduces this preconditioned resolvent.
Yeah.
And it shows how it incorporates this precondition.
Yeah, right.
And what's cool is that the preconditioned resolvent, it involves finding this point X.
Yes.
Such that the sum of the operator A applied to X.
Right.
And the preconditioned difference between X and a given point Z equals 0.
Exactly. It's like finding a balance point.
Okay.
Where the forces exerted by A and the preconditioned difference kind of cancel each other out.
Got it. But there's a catch, right?
There is.
Unlike the standard resolvent, which is always single-valued and well-defined, this preconditioned version, JM1A, it can be a little more temperamental.
It can't.
It might not always be single-valued or defined everywhere.
Right.
Which adds a layer of complexity
to
the analysis.
So it's like our upgraded toolbox comes with these powerful tools that require a bit more finesse and caution.
Right. So we need to be mindful of their limitations, but we don't run into any mathematical mishaps.
And to navigate these potential pitfalls, the paper introduces these concepts of M monotonicity and M cocoercivity, which are like customized versions of those properties.
Got it.
Tailored to handle this precondition setting.
Okay, so equation 4.3 beautifully illustrates M cocoercivity.
Yes, it does.
Showing how that preconditioning matrix M modifies the usual cocoercivity inequality.
Exactly. It's like adjusting our mathematical lens to kind of bring the preconditioned world into focus.
And to avoid those pathological cases where JM1A might misbehave, the paper imposes some sensible conditions.
Right. We require that its domain, encompasses the entire space.
Okay.
So ensuring that it's defined everywhere we need it to be.
Got it.
Additionally, we require that the operator M plus A inverse is Lipschitz continuous over the image of M, which essentially limits how much the operator can stretch or distort things.
So these conditions are like setting up guardrails.
Exactly.
For our mathematical machinery, making sure that everything runs smoothly.
Now hold on tight because things are about to get even more interesting.
Okay.
The paper introduces this concept of an onto decomposition of M, which is represented by the factorization M equals CC, where C is a one-to-one map from another Hilbert space D to H.
So it's like we've opened this secret passage between two mathematical universes.
You got it.
We're connecting our preconditioned problem in H to a corresponding problem in this new space D.
Right.
What's the advantage of that?
So this connection opens up exciting possibilities for solving the problem from different perspectives.
Got it.
And equation 4.5 beautifully captures this relationship, demonstrating the equivalence between the preconditioned resolvent in H and the standard resolvent of a cleverly transformed operator in D.
So it's like we're solving the problem in D using familiar tools and then using the map C to project the solution back into H.
Exactly.
This reminds me of this concept of shadow sequences.
You're exactly right. We're essentially working with a shadow sequence in D that kind of mirrors the behavior of the original sequence in H.
And while this connection to the standard proximal point algorithm is powerful, proving the convergence of those shadow sequences in infinite dimensional spaces requires some extra care.
It does.
And example 4.1 provides a nice concrete illustration of these ideas.
It does.
Showcasing the Douglas-Ratchford splitting method as a prime example of these preconditioned resolvent iterations.
It's a brilliant example.
Yeah.
It demonstrates how the DRS method, with its carefully chosen operators A and M, can be seamlessly represented within this preconditioned framework.
And equations 4.6 and 4.7 lay out the specifics.
They do.
Showcasing how these operators lead to those familiar DRS updates.
What's fascinating is that for almost 3 decades, the convergence of those shadow sequences in infinite dimensional spaces remained an open problem until Svader's breakthrough proof in 2018.
It's crazy how long these problems can remain unsolved.
It's a testament to the persistence, ingenuity of mathematicians in tackling these challenging problems.
So the analysis of these preconditioned resolvent iterations provides a powerful framework for recovering this result and extending it to like a wider range of algorithms.
It is a beautiful example of how abstract mathematical tools can unlock concrete algorithmic insights.
So let's dive into lemma 4.2.
Sure.
The degenerate Oppiel lemma.
Yes.
Which seems like a specialized version of Oppiel's lemma designed to handle these degenerate preconditioners. Why is this lemma so important?
So lemma 4.2 is our secret weapon for proving convergence in this preconditioned setting. Because it allows us to kind of adapt the usual convergence arguments to cases where the preconditioner M might not be full rank.
Got it.
So think of it as like a mathematical upgrade that expands our toolkit to handle a wider range of scenarios.
So the lemma outlines 2 key conditions.
It does.
First, it states that the limit of this specific sequence involving the M seminorm must exist. And second, it requires that the M seminorm of the difference between consecutive iterates goes to 0.
Yes.
What do these conditions mean?
So these conditions basically impose a certain regularity on the behavior of the sequence.
Got it.
The first condition ensures that the sequence doesn't oscillate wildly, but instead approaches a well-defined limit in a specific sense. And the second condition makes sure that the iterates are getting closer to each other as the algorithm progresses.
So it's like our solution is converging towards a target.
Exactly.
And each step is taking it closer.
That's a great way to put it.
To the bullseye.
And if these conditions hold, lemma 4.2 guarantees this weak convergence of the preconditioned resolvent iterates to a 0 of the operator A.
And when M has closed range,
and
we have that special onto decomposition, we can connect back to that transformed problem in D. And we see that the W sequence in D converges to a 0 of the transformed operator CA.
Exactly. It's like we are solving the problem in 2 spaces simultaneously, taking advantage of the connections between them to gain a deeper understanding of the convergence behavior.
Like these 2 spaces are informing each other.
Exactly.
And we're getting information from both.
It's a testament to the elegance and power of this preconditioned framework.
So now theorem 4.3 takes center stage, extending the convergence guarantees of algorithm 1 to this preconditioned setting.
It's like we're taking our powerful convergence engine and adapting it to handle a new type of fuel, one that's potentially more potent, but also requires more careful handling.
And thanks to the degenerate Oppiel lemma, the proof of theorem 4.3 follows almost directly from the original theorem 3.4.
It does.
So we still get those nice summability properties.
I do.
And little order rates of convergence. But now in terms of the M seminorm.
Exactly. It's like our convergence guarantees have been upgraded to account for the unique challenges of this precondition setting.
And the theorem goes even further.
It does.
Connecting back to that transform problem in D, when M has closed range and that onto decomposition.
It's like our convergence story. Unfolds in 2 parallel chapters, each enriching and illuminating the other.
But remark, 4.4 injects a bit of caution into our celebration.
Right.
While we have these strong convergence guarantees for the preconditioned resolvent iterates, the convergence of the original sequence itself requires a more nuanced analysis.
Our upgraded engine might handle the new fuel well. But we need to make sure that the rest of our mathematical vehicle is properly equipped to handle the increased power.
So we've upgraded the engine, but we need to make sure that the rest of the car can handle it.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it highlights the need for careful and rigorous analysis, even when working with seemingly well-behaved tools.
So remark, 4.5 sheds light on a special case.
It does.
Where alpha equals 2. Connecting us back to the optimal Halpern method.
Exactly.
With its strong convergence properties.
It's like finding a familiar landmark in this new mathematical landscape. And when M has closed range, the strong convergence of the Halpern method ensures the convergence of the original sequence as well.
Okay, cool. So now let's shift our attention to section 4.3.
Sure.
Where the paper dives into this specific application of this framework. The Graf-Douglas-Ratchford splitting method? Or Graph-DRS for
Exactly. The Graph-DRS method is all about solving monotone inclusion problems involving a sum of n-resolvent-friendly maximal monotone operators. And equation 4.Lundile lays out, you know, the general structure of the problem we are dealing with. And the beauty of the Graph-DRS method is that it fits perfectly within our precondition resolvent framework. And equations 4.13 and 4.14 unveil those specific choices for the operators A and M that capture the essence of this method.
So the careful construction of these operators, incorporating those special matrices Z and Z, allows us to leverage all of those convergence guarantees that we established earlier.
Exactly. It's like we have custom designed our mathematical machinery to tackle this specific challenge.
And there's this cool connection.
There is.
Between the fixed points of the transformed operator in D and consensus on the components of the solution in H equation 4.15 quantifies this relationship.
It does.
Showing how that fixed point residual in D controls a measure of dispersion or variance in H.
So we're essentially solving 2 problems simultaneously.
At the same time.
Finding a solution in D and ensuring that its components in H are in agreement. It's a testament to the elegance and power of this framework.
Proposition 4.6 brings it all together.
It does.
Providing the convergence guarantees for algorithm 2, which implements the fast Douglas-Ratchford method for N operators. So we took our engine, we fine-tuned it for this task, and now we're ready to go.
Proposition 4.6 guarantees the weak convergence of both the W sequence in D and the X sequence to a solution of the original problem in H. Along with those familiar little rates of convergence.
It even goes further.
It does.
Providing specific convergence rates for the variance of the solution and the residual of the operators. So it's like we reached our destination with precision and speed.
And for those who are interested in the practical implications of these results, the third part of Proposition 4.6 focuses on the case where the operators are subdifferentials of convex functions. And it shows that the function values converge to the optimal value at a specific rate, connecting our abstract framework to concrete optimization problems.
So it's like we took this machinery, we tested it on a real-world problem, and we confirmed that it actually works.
That's a fantastic way to wrap up this deep dive into the intricacies of this generalized, fast Krasnosel'kĉi Mann method.
Right. So we've covered, you know, a lot of ground exploring the theoretical foundations of this generalized, fast Krasnosel'kŷ Mann method.
Yeah.
And how it applies to those splitting methods with preconditioners.
Right.
But how does it actually perform in practice?
Right. So that's where the numerical experiments section comes in.
Okay.
Section 5 is where the authors put this method to the test.
Yeah.
They run experiments
on
both carefully designed toy problems and some real-world scenarios.
Got it.
To kind of see how well it performs in action.
So it's like we're taking our mathematical race car.
Exactly.
Out for a test drive.
Out for a spin on the track.
To see how fast it can go.
Exactly, to see what it can do.
Okay, so what kind of test problems did they cook up?
So they started by setting up two main types of operators, denoted by T, to kind of explore the method's capabilities.
Okay.
The first type involves an optimization problem, where, we're trying to minimize a sum of convex functions, a classic setup that, pops up in many different fields.
So this first case is a great way to test algorithm 2.
It is.
Which is designed to handle those splitting methods for optimization problems.
Precisely. And by choosing functions with easily computable proximity operators, they're setting the stage for efficient numerical testing.
So we picked a track that's both challenging, but also allows us to really show off the car's speed.
Exactly.
The second type of operator is a bit more abstract.
It is.
It involves a skew-symmetric matrix.
Right.
So these matrices have some unique properties.
They do.
When it comes to fixed point problems. So it allows the authors to test algorithm 1 in this more general setting, pushing it beyond those optimization problems.
It's like taking our race car off-road.
Okay, cool. So what happens when they start tweaking these extra parameters, eta and sigma?
Right. So the authors kind of systematically investigate the impact of these parameters, starting with eta.
Okay.
They compared the baseline choice of 12 with other values ranging from 0 to 1.
Okay.
And figures 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Beautifully illustrate the results of these experiments.
Okay.
Showcasing how different values of eta affect the convergence speed.
So looking at those figures, it seems like choosing eta less than 12 can actually lead to faster convergence.
It can.
In certain cases, which is a bit counterintuitive.
It is.
It's like slowing down the engines slightly can lead to a faster overall lap time.
But the authors provide some insightful explanation for this phenomenon based on the properties of the energy function.
Okay.
It turns out that the choice of eta influences the balance between different terms in the energy decrease inequality, sometimes favoring a faster reduction of certain terms over others.
So the equation 5.1, it lays out this crucial inequality that governs that energy decrease.
Yes, it does.
It shows how eta directly affects that rate at which the energy goes down, like adjusting the throttle.
Exactly.
And then equation 5.2, it highlights the trade-off between those two different rates of convergence.
Yes.
One for the fixed point residual. And one for that specific inner product term.
It's like balancing the car's speed with its stability.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all.
Exactly.
The best choice of eta depends on the problem and the trade-offs we're willing to make.
Precisely so. For instance, when dealing with linear skew symmetric operators, one particular choice of eta emerges as optimal.
Okay.
However, when dealing with resolvents of primal dual operators, a different choice might be preferred.
Got it.
It all comes down to understanding, the nuances of the problem at hand and tuning the parameters accordingly.
Okay, so let's move on to sigma.
Sure.
The other parameter that controls the starting time.
Right.
What insights did they gain from exploring its influence?
Right. So figure 3 provides a visual feast of those experiments.
Okay.
Showing how different choices of sigma affect the convergence trajectories for various values of alpha.
So it's like our car starting from different positions on the track.
Exactly.
And based on those experiments, it seems like setting sigma equal to alpha is a pretty solid choice in practice.
It seems to lead to consistently good performance.
So it's like we found that sweet spot on the starting grid.
Exactly.
It gives our car the best chance to take the lead.
And now, building upon these experimental insights, the authors introduce this clever cooling heuristic in section 5.3. It's like they're borrowing a technique from metallurgy, gradually adjusting the parameter alpha over time to improve convergence.
So how does that work?
So equation 5.4 captures the essence of this cooling heuristic.
Okay.
Instead of keeping alpha constant,
Right.
We start with a smaller value, and we gradually increase it over the iterations.
Got it.
Until it reaches a predefined maximum value denoted by alpha max.
So it's like we're slowly ramping up the engine's power.
Exactly.
To avoid any sudden jolts or anything like that.
And they tested both linear and logarithmic scaling strategies for increasing alpha, comparing them to the standard FAST-KM method.
Right.
And the basic Krasnosel'kŷi Mann method.
Okay.
And figure 4 provides a clear picture of the results.
And it's really cool to see how those different scaling strategies affect that convergence behavior.
The results are quite compelling.
Yeah.
This cooling heuristic combined with algorithm 1 seems to outperform.
Okay.
The other methods in many cases, achieving faster convergence without sacrificing stability.
So it's like we boosted the engine's power.
Exactly.
But we kept a smooth ride.
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
And for the grand finale, the authors take their method out of this controlled environment of toy problems.
Right.
And they apply it to real-world challenges.
Right.
In section 5.4, they kind of explore applications to optimal transport.
Okay.
And the geometric median problem.
Got it.
Demonstrating the practical relevance of this powerful tool.
So this is where we really see the value of the method.
This is where it shines.
In the optimal transport example.
Yeah.
They tackle this high-dimensional problem using the Beckman minimal flow formulation of the Wasserstein-1 distance, which is a way to measure the cost of moving things around efficiently.
That's a great way to put it.
And the graph DRS method, powered by algorithm 2, emerges as a top performer.
Right, it outperforms the standard Krasnosel'kɁi Mann method.
And figure 5 shows how those tweaks
it does
to eta and alpha can make a big difference in that convergence speed.
Right.
And then the geometric median problem.
Yes.
It's this classic challenge.
It is.
In optimization and statistics, it involves finding a point that minimizes the sum of distances to a set of other points.
That's right. So it's like finding that central hub that minimizes the overall travel distance to all the other points.
And once again, algorithm 2, combined with a clever choice of operators and parameters, demonstrates its effectiveness.
Right. Converging faster and more reliably than the standard method.
So to wrap things up, we've taken a deep dive into this generalized, fast Krasnosel'kŷi Mann method. We explored its theoretical foundations.
Yes.
Its application to splitting methods with preconditioner.
You did.
Its impressive performance in numerical experiments and its real-world relevance in solving all of these challenging problems.
It's been a fascinating journey.
Yeah.
Highlighting the power and the beauty of this mathematical framework.
And who knows, maybe this deep dive sparked some new ideas or questions for you. After all, the authors themselves acknowledge that there's still some open questions. And avenues for further research.
There's always more to explore.
So, until next time.
Yes.
Keep exploring that fascinating world of mathematics. And keep those minds curious. All right, welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into accelerated numerical methods.
Okay.
We're going to be talking about a paper called Generalized Fast Krasnosel'kŷi Mann Method with Preconditioners.
That's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful, yeah. But, you know, stick with us here. It's going to be worth it, especially because you're really into mathematical optimization.
Right.
And this is all about speeding up the way that we find solutions to fixed point problems.
Absolutely.
And to help us break all that down, we have with us an expert in numerical optimization.
Hi.
They're going to help us unpack this.
Excited to be here.
Awesome. So let's set the stage here. What's the core problem that this paper is addressing?
So at its heart, this paper is about finding fixed points of non-expansive operators in a Hilbert space.
Sure.
You can think about it as finding a point in a space that doesn't move when a specific kind of transformation is applied to it.
Okay, so in the paper, they jump right in with equation 1.1. They're looking for an x that satisfies the equation x equals t of x, where t is our non-expansive operator. What are the implications of finding these fixed points?
Yeah, so it's actually, it's deceptively simple. That equation underpins a wide range of applications, like across many different fields. So you can think about optimization, signal processing, machine learning, even game theory. It's a very fundamental concept.
It's like the foundation for a lot of different things.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, cool. So before we get into the author's new approach, they give us a little tour of the existing methods for tackling this fixed point problem. What are some of the key players that they highlight?
So they touch on both continuous time and discrete time methods, right?
Sure.
So, for example, they mention Nesterov's algorithm, which is particularly popular in convex optimization. And it's a classic example of what we call inertial acceleration. It's essentially using a sort of momentum to speed up the convergence towards a solution.
So it's like we're giving it a little push.
Exactly, yeah.
To get there faster. What other approaches do they mention?
So they also discuss the fast optimistic gradient descent ascent, fast OGDA system,
right,
and the Halpern method. Each of these has its own advantages and disadvantages, of course, in terms of, how fast it is, the stability, and the ease of implementation.
Right. So there's no one perfect method.
Exactly, yeah.
And that's part of what makes it so interesting. So even with all these methods, there's still room for improvement, right? Like the authors point out some limitations, like those oscillations that we often see in inertial acceleration methods, as well as just the slow convergence that we get with some of the more traditional methods. And this is where the authors step in with their novel approach, which is the generalized fast Krasnosel'kži Mann method. Can you unpack what's new and exciting about this method for us?
Yeah, so they introduce a new continuous time dynamical system, which is represented in equation 2.1. And this equation governs the evolution of the solution over time. What's really interesting here is that they introduce this new parameter, which is called eta, and this parameter acts like a tuning knob. It gives us more control over how the system behaves.
So it's like they've added a new control to the system.
Exactly, yeah. It's like fine-tuning, if you will.
Okay, so can we dive into equation 2.1 just a little bit deeper? What is going on in there?
So, at the core of it, right, it's a second-order differential equation, and it's essentially describing how the solution, which is x of t, changes with respect to time.
Okay.
So you have a second derivative of x, which represents the acceleration. You have the first derivative, which is, of course, the velocity. And then you have terms involving the operator q and some time-dependent coefficients.
Okay.
So pull bet of t and b of t, and these coefficients, they play a very critical role in how quickly and how smoothly the system actually end up converging to a fixed point.
Okay, so each one of these pieces in the equation has a job to do.
Exactly, yeah.
And the choice of b of t, as defined in equation 2.2, is particularly important, right?
It is, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the way that b of t is actually defined in terms of d of t and another parameter I, it directly affects the convergence properties of this whole system.
Okay.
So the authors have clearly put a lot of thought into how these parameters interact,
right,
and what the overall behavior of the system is.
Okay, so this is where we start getting into the nitty-gritty of the mathematical proof.
Yes.
To show that their system actually converges to a fixed point, they use what's called Lyapunov analysis. Can you give us just the basic idea behind Lyapunov analysis?
Yeah, so Lyapunov analysis is a beautiful tool. It's used for studying the stability and convergence of dynamical systems, essentially.
Okay.
And the idea is to find a special function. You can call it an energy function, right? Well, it decreases over time as the system evolves. And if you can show that this energy function is decreasing and it's bounded below, then eventually that means that the system is going to settle down at a stable state.
So it's like watching a ball roll down a hill. Eventually, it's going to stop at the bottom.
Exactly. Yeah. Perfect analogy.
Okay. So how do the authors define this energy function for their system?
So they define it in equation 2.3.
Okay.
And it does involve inner products and norms and those parameters that we talked about. But each term captures something specific about the system. And ni plays a very key role here as well. It shapes this energy function. And ultimately, this shapes how the system converges.
Okay, so they have this energy function defined.
Yeah.
And then they're analyzing how that changes over time.
Exactly.
To make sure that it's decreasing.
Yeah. So they analyze the derivative of this energy function with respect to time. And this is given in equation 2.5.
Right.
And it's through this that they can show that under certain conditions, this energy function is indeed decreasing over time.
Okay, so we want it to go down.
Yes, we want it to go down. Exactly.
To ensure this decrease, they introduce a growth condition on the parameter vanity. This is in equation 2.6. And this leads us to theorem 2.2. Can you walk us through the key takeaways of this theorem?
Yeah, so Theorem 2.2, it's basically the culmination of their continuous time analysis. They show that under certain conditions on the parameters in particular, that growth condition on egg t, the solution of their dynamical system will converge to a fixed point of the operator Q.
So they've mathematically proven that their method will find a solution.
Exactly.
Given the right conditions.
Yeah.
And they don't just stop there. They also show how fast it happens.
They do, yeah. They actually go into the rates of convergence, and they show that by cleverly choosing these parameters, the system can converge much faster than traditional methods. And in fact, they achieve something called little o rates, which means the convergence is even faster than any inverse polynomial rate.
Wow, that's really fast.
It is, yeah. It's impressive.
So they've proven that it works. They've proven that it's efficient. But all of this analysis has been in continuous time, which is that smooth, uninterrupted flow. But in the real world, when we're talking about computation, we work with discrete time algorithms where things happen in steps. How do the authors bridge this gap?
Yeah, so that's a very important point, and they do a great job of that. They take those continuous time results and they turn it into a practical algorithm, which they call algorithm 1. And this is presented in the paper.
So this is where the rubber meets the road.
It is, yeah.
They're taking those beautiful ideas and making them to something usable.
Yeah, absolutely.
So algorithm 1 is the discrete counterpart to their continuous time system. They carefully explain how this algorithm is essentially like a discretization of that equation, equation 2.1. So instead of time flowing smoothly, we're taking these steps at discrete points in time, which are indexed by k.
Right.
And the choices of the parameters in the algorithm, alpha and sigma, are directly linked back to that continuous time analysis.
Absolutely, yeah. They show how those discrete parameters, they relate to the continuous time coefficients.
Right.
And that ensures that the algorithm is really capturing the behavior of that continuous system.
Okay, so now they've laid out this algorithm.
Yeah.
But now they have to prove that it works in this new discrete setting.
Yeah.
How do they go about doing that?
So they follow a similar path. They use a discrete version of Lyapunov analysis.
Okay.
And they introduce a discrete energy function, which mirrors the structure of the continuous time 1. That's given in equation 3.8.
So it's like the same idea, but we're adapting it to steps.
Exactly, yeah. And they then analyze how this discrete energy function changes with each step of the algorithm, right? And then they come to this important result, which is lemma 3.3. And this shows that under certain conditions, this energy function decreases with every iteration of the algorithm.
And that's what we want. We want it to be going down.
We do. That means we're getting closer to the solution.
What's the equation that underpins this energy decrease property?
So that is equation 3.Mann.
Okay.
And it describes how the energy function actually changes from one step to the next. And they can actually demonstrate that, yes, indeed, the energy is decreasing.
Okay. It's not just like hoping that it goes down. Yeah. They've actually shown that it does.
Absolutely. Yeah. Rigorous proof.
And all of this leads to theorem 3.4, which is like the discrete version of that earlier convergence theorem.
Right.
What's the big takeaway there?
So theorem 3.4, it provides the convergence guarantees for this algorithm 1, right?
Right.
And it shows that, again, under appropriate conditions on the parameters, the points generated by this algorithm will actually converge to a fixed point of the operator t.
Awesome. So they've basically proven that this discrete version also works.
They have, yes.
But before we move on, let's look at a specific detail that maybe some readers have glossed over.
Okay.
Equation 3.4.
Ah, yes, equation 3.4. That's subtle, but it's important.
What's going on there?
It essentially shows how they discretize the continuous time system. Right. So it's bridging the gap between that smooth world and the step-by-step world of algorithms.
They're taking that smooth curve and approximating it with a bunch of little lines.
Exactly, yeah. Each line represents a step.
But there's a nuance here, right? The way they do this is different from what's been done in previous work.
Yeah, absolutely. So the key difference is that their discretization is semi-implicit. The previous one, for example, for FASTO-GDA, was fully implicit. And this has a huge implication for efficiency.
So what's the advantage of this semi-implicit approach?
So a fully implicit discretization can often lead to a system of equations that is really hard to solve directly.
Okay.
So you might have to use iterative methods, and that adds a whole other layer of computational cost.
Right. It makes them more complicated.
It does. The semi-implicit approach is much simpler to implement and computationally less demanding.
So they found a way to approximate it without making it too hard to actually do.
Exactly. It's elegance and feasibility.
Awesome. Now, before we go on, there are a couple of remarks that show how this new method connects to some other work in the field. Remark 3.1 highlights the relationship between algorithm 1 and an earlier fast Krasnosel'kĉi Mann method. What's the key takeaway there?
Yeah, so it shows that algorithm 1 is actually a generalization of that earlier scheme. It's like they've taken that previous idea and made it even better.
Right. Made it more flexible.
Exactly.
Okay, and then remark 3.2 is really interesting because it connects algorithm 1 to another whole family of methods called Halpern-type methods. What's the significance of that connection?
So the Halpern method is a very well-known method for finding fixed points.
Okay.
And remark 3.2 shows that by carefully choosing the parameters in algorithm 1, it can actually be seen as a special case of what's called the optimal Halpern method, or OHM.
Okay, so their algorithm isn't just like the standalone thing. It has connections to other important methods.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is that this connection to OHM brings together two seemingly different acceleration techniques. So you have inertial acceleration, which we talked about, like in Nesterov's algorithm, and then you have anchoring, which is very typical of Halpern-type methods.
Anchoring, what's that?
So you can think of it as like a fixed reference point that helps to guide the algorithm towards the solution. It's like you have a compass.
Yes.
You might be taking some detours, but you're still going to get to the right place.
Right. You have something to help you stay on course.
Exactly. So by unifying these two things, inertial acceleration and anchoring,
right,
they've created a really powerful approach.
It's like they're combining the best of both worlds.
Exactly.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, well, we've covered a lot of ground in these first few sections. They've laid with the problem. They introduced this new continuous time system, translated it into this really usable algorithm, and then proven that both of these things converge.
Yeah, they've been busy.
They have. And then they've also connected their work to all these other important methods in the field.
It's a really comprehensive paper.
It is. I feel like we've learned a ton already, and we're just getting started.
Yeah, there's more to come. In the next part, we're going to look at how they actually use this for splitting methods and preconditioners. That's where it gets really practical.
Awesome. Well, let's take a deep breath and dive into that next part.
Okay, so we've laid some of the theoretical groundwork, right? We've explored this continuous time, discrete time foundation of this method.
Right.
But now let's see how this all connects to solving real problems.
Right, let's get practical.
Exactly. So this is where splitting methods come in.
Okay, splitting methods. These sound kind of intense.
Yeah. It's not quite martial arts, but it does involve, some strategic division. So splitting methods are really designed to handle these really complex optimization problems.
Okay.
And we do that by breaking them down to smaller, easier to manage pieces.
Okay. Divide and conquer. I like it. But how does this paper tie into splitting methods?
Yeah, so the connection is in the clever use of what we call preconditioner.
Preconditioners, okay. Yeah. What are those?
Yeah, so imagine you have like a tough nut to crack, right?
Okay.
A preconditioner is like using a nutcracker. It makes the job easier.
Okay.
So in math terms, a preconditioner is an operator that we apply to the problem to make our algorithms converge faster.
So it's like giving our algorithms a boost.
It is, yeah. Exactly. It's like a performance enhancer, if you will. And the paper specifically focuses on what we call precondition resolvents. These are defined in equation 4.1.
Okay.
And they're essentially the building blocks for designing efficient splitting methods.
Okay. Equation 4.1 looks a bit intimidating. Can we unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So it involves the identity operator, our preconditioner M, and then our operator A.
Right.
And the resolvent is basically defined as the inverse of the sum of the identity and M inverse times A. And the choice of the preconditioner M is very important. It can really affect how fast our algorithm converges to a solution.
Okay, so we got to choose wisely.
We do.
But there's a catch, right? The paper mentions something called degenerate preconditioners.
They do, yeah. Those can be a bit tricky.
Okay, what are those?
So essentially, a degenerate preconditioner may not be invertible in the usual sense. It's like having a key that doesn't quite fit the lock.
Okay, so how do we deal with these ill-fitting keys?
Yeah, well, the authors actually introduced some really cool techniques to handle these degenerate preconditioners. And one of the key tools is the Opio lemma.
Okay, the Opio lemma. We've heard that name before.
We have.
But doesn't the classical Opio lemma like kind of break down when we have these degenerate preconditioners?
It does, yeah. You're absolutely right. And that's why they introduce a modified version.
Okay.
which is called the degenerate Opie lemma, and it's presented in lemma 4.2.
Okay.
And what this does is it extends that classical version to actually be able to handle these degenerate preconditioners.
So they're giving this classic tool an upgrade.
They are, yeah.
So how does this degenerate Opie lemma actually help us?
So it guarantees something called the weak convergence of shadow sequences.
Shadow sequences.
Yeah. So these shadow sequences, they're generated by the splitting method.
Right.
And they might not converge directly to the solution, but they give us valuable information about the convergence of the actual solution.
So it's like a little clue as to what's going on.
It is, yeah, like a shadow, like you said.
Okay. So to actually see this in action, they dive into a specific application, and they show how this generalized fast Krasnosel'k'i Mann method can be used to speed up something called the graph-based Douglas-Ratchford splitting method, graph DRS. What's so special about this graph DRS?
So graph DRS is really powerful for solving a wide variety of problems, especially when we have multiple operators. It's a generalization of the classic Douglas-Ratchford slating method.
Okay.
And it can handle more complex scenarios.
Okay, so like a souped-up version.
Exactly, yeah.
So how does it actually work?
So it uses graphs, like you would think. So think of it as the network diagram. Each node represents an operator, and the connections between the nodes represent how those operators interact.
Okay.
Equation 4.12 introduces what we call the graph DRS operator.
Okay.
And this captures how the algorithm updates its steps using those preconditioned resolvents that we talked about earlier.
Right.
So it's like we're assembling these preconditioned resolvents into a machine guided by this graph structure.
Okay, it's all coming together. But this graph DRS operator relies on some matrices, right? Z and Z transpose.
It does, yeah. So those matrices are defined in equation 4.11, and they basically capture the structure of the problem. They ensure that the operators work together and that the algorithm converges correctly.
They're like the instruction manual for the machine.
Exactly.
Okay. And to analyze how well this graph DRS method converges, they connect it back to the idea of degenerate proximal point methods.
They do, yeah.
Why is this connection significant?
So by putting this graph DRS method into this framework, they can use all the tools and the insights that we've developed so far.
Okay.
So they define specific operators A and M in equation 4.13 to represent the graph DRS within this framework.
Right.
And importantly, the preconditioner M in this case is actually degenerate.
Okay, so those tricky preconditioners are back.
They are, but now we have the tools to handle them.
Right, because of that degenerate Opie lemma.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. There's another concept they introduce here, the variance of the iterates, defined in equation 4.15. What is that about?
Yeah, so the variance basically measures how spread out the iterates are as the algorithm is working.
Okay.
So a smaller variance basically means that the iterates are closer to a consensus, and that's good. That means that they're converging.
Okay, so less spread out, better convergence.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
And what they show is that this variance is directly related to what we call the fixed point residual of the algorithm.
Right.
So smaller residual, smaller variance, closer to the solution.
It's all connected. Okay, so they've brought together all these concepts: preconditioners, resolvents, graphs, proximal point methods, variances, and all of this culminates in algorithm 2, the fast Douglas-Ratchford method for multiple operators.
Yes.
This is where the rubber really meets the road.
It is. This is the practical algorithm.
Okay, so what does it tell us?
It brings together all those insights, right?
Right.
From the generalized method, from the graph DRS framework, into this really, really nice algorithm. And then the grand finale, proposition 4.6, that gives us the convergence guarantees for this algorithm.
Okay, so they didn't just design the algorithm, they also proved that it works.
They did, yeah. Rigorous proof.
That's impressive. So what does that convergence result tell us?
So proposition 4.6 says that the sequences that are generated by this algorithm 2 converge to solutions of this monotone inclusion problem. And remember, that's the type of problem that graph DRS is designed to solve. They also give us convergence rates for the variance of those iterates, highlighting that this accelerated method is even faster than the standard graph DRS.
So they've taken this complex idea and made it into something real, something practical, and something that works really well.
Absolutely.
Okay. Before we move on to the last section, can we talk about the non-negativity of the energy function? I feel like that's a small detail that's actually really important.
You're right. That is a very subtle point, but it is very crucial for the entire Lyapunov analysis to actually work. And equation 3.9 plays a big part in ensuring this. It involves the operator Q and the fact that it's firmly non-expansive.
Okay, firmly non-expansive. Now, there's a term we haven't come across yet. What does that mean?
Yeah, so it's a special property of certain operators. It's stronger than just non-expansive. It guarantees a certain relationship between inner products involving the operator and its output. And this relationship, which you can see in equation 3.9, ensures that the energy function stays non-negative.
So it's like a safety net, making sure that the energy function doesn't go negative.
Exactly, because if it did, the whole argument wouldn't hold.
Right. Okay, cool. So we've covered splitting methods, how preconditioners make things converge faster, the degenerate opal lemma that helps us in those tricky situations, and then this graph DRS method that uses graphs to solve these really sophisticated optimization problems. What's next?
So in the final section, they actually show us how to apply all of this to a very specific problem. And it actually has connections to image processing and machine learning.
Okay, cool. Let's see what they've got. Okay, so we're in the final section of this paper on this generalized fast Krasnosel'kĉi Mann method. We've seen, the theory, the algorithms, how it connects to splitting methods.
Right.
Now, let's see how they apply this to, like, a real-world problem.
Yeah. So this last section really shows how powerful all these tools can be.
Okay.
So they apply their method to a problem that involves something called the total variation norm.
Right.
And this is something that's often used in image processing and machine learning. So it's basically about denoising or smoothing an image.
Okay, so we're taking, like, a grainy image and cleaning it up.
Exactly. But you don't want to lose any important detail.
Right. We don't want to blur it out too much.
Exactly.
So how does that image denoising problem, how does that fit into everything we've been talking about?
So it turns out that you can actually formulate this total variation denoising problem as a convex optimization problem.
Okay.
Specifically, a minimization problem involving the total variation norm. And you can solve this problem using splitting methods.
Oh, okay.
So they show how you can use this generalized fast Krasnosel'kĉi Mann method to speed up a specific splitting method, which is called the Douglas-Ratchford splitting method, to solve this denoising problem really efficiently.
So we're taking this really abstract idea, this optimization framework, and using it to actually do something practical.
Exactly.
That's really cool. Can we go through the specifics of, like, how they set this problem up and how they solve it?
Sure. So they start by introducing something called the ROF model. It's named after Rudin, Osher, and Fatemi. And it involves minimizing this functional model that includes the total variation norm of the image and something called the data fidelity term, which basically measures how well the denoised image matches the original noisy one.
Okay.
They represent this model mathematically in equation 5.1.
Okay, equation 5.1, it's a little complex, but it seems like it's trying to find that balance between smoothing the image and staying true to the original data.
Exactly. And then they get into the details of how to solve this problem using the Douglas-Ratchford splitting method.
Right.
They have this formulation in equations 5.2 and 5.3, defining the operators and setting everything up. And they highlight that one of the operators is actually co-coercive.
Co-coercive? What's that?
Yeah. It's a special property that some operators have.
Okay.
It's stronger than just being non-expansive. It guarantees like a stronger contraction, which is really good for convergence.
So it helps us get to the answer faster.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
And then they actually present the algorithm for solving this ROF model using Douglas-Ratchford splitting. It's algorithm 3 in the paper. And this basically outlines all the steps to find that denoised image.
So this algorithm 3, this is the result of all their work.
It is, yeah. It's taking this really abstract concept, tailoring it to splitting methods and applying it to this real-world problem.
It's a great example of how those, like, theoretical ideas can actually lead to really practical solutions.
Yeah, I agree. It's beautiful.
So I think we've come to the end of this deep dive. Can we just, like, take a moment to reflect on what we've learned?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this paper presents a big step forward in optimization methods. They introduced this generalized fast Krasnosel'kĉi Mann method. It's flexible, it's efficient, it's rigorously analyzed. They even extended it to handle those degenerate preconditioners, which really opens up a lot of possibilities.
And they showed us how we can use it for all sorts of problems, from theoretical to practical. So this is really cool research. I think it's going to have a big impact on the field.
I think so, too.
Well, there you have it. We explored a really fascinating paper today. We learned about accelerated numerical methods, splitting methods, image processing, all kinds of cool stuff. And to our listener, we hope you enjoyed this deep dive as much as we did.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and we'll see you next time. Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Always up for a good mathematical challenge.
All right. Today we're tackling a paper called Generalized, Fast Krasnosel'k'i Method with Preconditioners.
Ah, yes, by Bu, CHENCHENE, and FADILI. It's a fascinating exploration of finding those elusive fixed points and doing it quickly.
Exactly. So for our listeners who might not be familiar, can you quickly explain what a fixed point is? And why should we care about finding them fast?
Sure. Imagine you have a function, kind of like a machine that takes an input and spits out an output. A fixed point is an input that, when you feed it to this machine, it comes out unchanged. It's like a perfect equilibrium point. And finding these points quickly, well, they're the key to solving all sorts of problems, from optimizing complex systems to understanding dynamic processes. The faster we find them, the faster we can unlock solutions.
Okay, so speed is key. Now let's jump into the paper itself. Page 1 starts with these non-expansive operators. I'll admit, it sounds a bit intimidating. Can you break that down for us?
It's not as scary as it sounds. Think of it like this. Imagine a map where the distances between cities either stay the same or shrink after you fold it. That's essentially what a non-expansive operator does. It doesn't stretch or expand the space it operates on. It keeps things nice and compact.
Okay, I'm starting to picture it. So equation 1.1 on this page, it sets up the core problem, finding a fixed point for one of these non-stretching operators.
Right, and this is where the connection to optimization becomes clear. Often, finding a fixed point is equivalent to finding the minimum of a function. It's like finding the lowest point in a valley.
So it's optimization gold.
Yeah.
But how do we actually find these fixed points quickly? The paper mentions Nesterov's accelerated algorithm. What's so special about it?
Nesterov's algorithm is like a speed boost for optimization. It's known for its efficiency and elegance. Equation 1.2 represents a continuous version of this algorithm, and the parameter controls how much acceleration we apply. Think of it as a knob that controls how fast we want to zoom towards the solution.
Interesting. But then you hit a snag. These accelerated methods can sometimes become unstable, right? Like they overshoot the target and start oscillating.
Exactly. It's like a car going too fast on a bumpy road. And that's where the Hessian-driven damping comes in, represented by equation 1.3. It's like adding shock absorbers to smooth out the ride and prevent those oscillations.
Okay, so we're speeding things up, but also keeping them under control. Now, page 2 gets even more interesting. We move to a general operator setting with equation 1.4. What's the significance of this shift?
We're broadening our horizons. Instead of just focusing on optimization problems, we're now considering fixed points for a much wider class of operators. It's like going from driving on paved roads to exploring off-road terrain. More possibilities, but also more challenges.
And one of the challenges seems to be the choice of BT in the FASTO-GDA system, right? Equation 1.4. The author suggests that its current limitations are holding the algorithm back.
You got it. The current choice of BT is like having a car with only one gear. It works fine on some terrains, but it limits our ability to navigate more complex landscapes efficiently.
So the authors are looking for a more versatile engine, so to speak.
Precisely. And that brings us to their key contribution on page 3. Equation 1.6 introduces a new, more flexible choice for BT with an additional parameter.
I see it. So E is like adding that extra gear, giving us more control over the algorithm's acceleration and stability.
It's a game changer. And this leads to algorithm 1, the generalized FastKLM method, a turbocharged version of the original, with even more potential for speed and efficiency.
Exciting. Now, on page 4, we encounter these coercive operators, another potentially intimidating term. Can you demystify that for us?
No worries. They're not as scary as they sound. Think of them as a special type of operator with a bit more structure, a bit more smoothness. They're like well-behaved functions that are easier to work with.
Okay, so smoother operators, smoother ride. And I see these monotone operators defined in equation 1.0. They're connected to fixed points too, right?
Absolutely. Finding the zeros of a monotone operator, the points where it equals 0, often boils down to finding fixed points of related operators. It's like finding different routes to the same destination.
And the resolvent of a monotone operator, is that like a guide, helping us navigate those routes?
You could say that. It's a key tool for finding those zeros and therefore those precious fixed points.
Got it. Now, on page 5, things get a bit more abstract with the introduction of a dynamical system in equation 2.1. What's the intuition behind this?
Imagine a system constantly evolving, like a ball rolling down a hill. This particular system, described by equation 2.1, is designed to guide us towards the zeros of a monotone operator, those points linked to our fixed point goal.
I see. And equation 2.2 incorporates our new and improved BT with its fancy parameter, adding that extra level of control.
Right. It's like fine-tuning the shape of the hill to ensure the ball rolls smoothly and efficiently towards its destination. And thankfully, the authors assure us that this system has a strong global solution, meaning it's well-behaved and won't suddenly fly off track.
That's reassuring. Now, to analyze how this system evolves, they introduce an energy function on this page. E in equation 2.3. Why is this energy function important?
Think of it like tracking the ball's energy as it rolls down the hill. We want to make sure it has enough energy to reach the bottom, the solution point. By analyzing how this energy function changes over time, we can understand the system's long-term behavior and ensure it converges properly.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's move on to page 6. Lemma 2.1 dives into the nitty-gritty of this energy function, focusing on its derivative. Why is the derivative so important in this context?
The derivative tells us how the energy is changing. Is it increasing or decreasing? If it's consistently decreasing, that's a good sign. It means the system is settling down, converging toward a stable state.
So we want to see that energy steadily decreasing, like the ball losing potential energy as it rolls downhill.
Exactly. And to guarantee this downward trend, the authors impose a growth condition on vel in equations 2.6 and 2.7. It's like making sure the hill slopes downward toward the solution.
I see. So we're carefully shaping the landscape to guide the system toward convergence. Now, page 7 brings us to a crucial point, Theorem 2.2. This theorem lays out the convergence rates, telling us how quickly the system approaches a solution.
It's the culmination of all the previous work, a mathematical symphony that quantifies the algorithm's efficiency.
The theorem focuses on the case where A is greater than 2 and A is greater than 0. What's the significance of these conditions?
These conditions ensure smoother and faster convergence. It's like choosing the optimal gear for our car to climb the hill efficiently.
And the theorem provides various insights, right? Integral bounds that guarantee the system stays on track, weak convergence of xt to a 0 of q, and those impressive little o convergence rates that demonstrate the algorithm's speed advantage.
Precisely. It's a comprehensive analysis that showcases the algorithm's power and robustness.
Impressive. Now, on page 8, we circle back to algorithm 1, the practical implementation of this theoretical framework. It's derived from a discretization of equation 2.1. Can you explain what that means in simpler terms?
Imagine you're watching a movie, a smooth, continuous flow of images. Discretization is like breaking that movie down into individual frames. Algorithm 1 is essentially the digital version of the continuous system described by 2.1.
So it's taking that smooth theoretical concept and making it practical for computations.
Exactly. And the authors highlight a key advantage. Algorithm 1 avoids the direct computation of the resolvent of Q, making it more efficient and practical.
That's a clever trick. Now, on page 9, we delve into specific choices for the parameters Biaseni in algorithm 1. They show that setting Saliani 12 recovers a method from a previous paper, highlighting the generalizing power of their approach.
It's like showing that their new souped-up car can not only handle off-road terrain, but can also seamlessly switch back to paved roads. Versatility is key.
I like that analogy. And they introduce a step size S in equation 3.6 to handle a broader class of operators, further expanding the algorithm's toolkit.
It's like adding adjustable suspension to our car, allowing it to adapt to different road conditions.
Smart. And they briefly discuss the case of SU2, connecting it to the optimal Halpern method and hinting at its unique convergence properties.
It's a glimpse into another fascinating path, showcasing the diversity and richness of optimization techniques.
Okay, so lots of possibilities to explore. Now, to analyze algorithm 1 in discrete time, they introduced the SE notation for finite differences on this page. What does that mean?
It's a handy tool for expressing changes between consecutive steps. Think of it like measuring the distance our car travels between each snapshot in time.
So we're tracking the algorithm's progress step by step.
Precisely. And that sets the stage for the in-depth discrete time analysis that follows.
All right. We'll dive into that analysis and more in the next part of our deep dive. See you soon.
Looking forward to it. Welcome back. Time to put this theory to the test and see if this generalized fast KOM method can actually deliver on its promises.
I'm all for that. Let's see how this algorithm performs in the real world.
Well, the authors start by throwing some tough challenges at it in section 5. They set up 2 types of problems to really push the algorithm to its limits.
Okay, what kind of problems are we talking about?
The first one is an optimization problem that involves multiple functions, a common scenario in machine learning. Think of it like training a complex model with a cost function that has many different parts, each pulling in a different direction.
So it's like trying to find the perfect balance between all these competing forces.
Exactly. Finding the minimum of that function is a real challenge, and for this challenge, they use algorithm 2, the one specifically tailored for splitting methods.
So a specialized tool for a specialized problem. What about the second type of problem?
For that, they go a bit more abstract, using an operator based on a skew-symmetric matrix.
Skew-symmetric matrix. Remind me what those are again.
They have a special property. They always lead to monotone operators, which, as we discussed earlier, play very nicely with the generalized FAST-KOM method.
Ah, right. So it's a good way to test the algorithm's broader applicability beyond just those optimization problems.
Precisely. And for the second problem, they use the more general algorithm 1. Now, section 5.2 is where things get really interesting. They start dissecting the impact of those extra parameters, E and sus, on the algorithm's performance.
So it's like fine-tuning the engine for optimal performance.
Exactly. They start by focusing on E in section 5.2.1, experimenting with different values and comparing them to the baseline of 12 used in previous work.
And what do they find? Does tuning wheat make a big difference?
Well, it's not so simple. For the first type of problem, they see some pretty dramatic improvements. Figures 1 and 2 show that smaller E-values lead to much faster convergence. But for the second type of problem, the impact of E is less pronounced.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of situation.
Right. It really highlights the subtle interplay between the algorithm and the specific problem being solved. For the first problem, a smaller E seems to strike a better balance between exploring different solutions and exploiting the best ones it finds along the way. But for the second problem, the landscape might be smoother, so fine-tuning it doesn't make as much of a difference.
It's like some roads are just naturally easier to drive on, regardless of how you fine-tune your car's engine.
I like that analogy. Now, to understand these nuances even better, the authors delve into the non-increase property of the energy function. Remember that function we talked about earlier, the one that tracks how much energy the system has?
Yeah, the one that's like monitoring the fuel level in our car, making sure we don't run out of gas before reaching the destination.
Exactly. Equation 5.1 is crucial here. It shows that when the parameter related to the starting time in the continuous dynamics is sufficiently large, the energy function consistently decreases. That leads to more stable and efficient convergence.
It's like making sure we start our journey with a full tank of gas.
And they take it a step further, analyzing the two convergence rates captured in equation 5.2. These rates provide a more detailed view of the algorithm's behavior, highlighting the trade-off between speed and stability.
So it's like optimizing for both speed and fuel efficiency in our car.
Yeah.
We want to get to the destination quickly, but also make sure we don't burn through all our gas in the process.
Precisely. Then, in section 5.2.2, they shift their focus to the parameter. They experiment with different values, comparing them to the choice of SA, which was used in previous work.
And what's the verdict? Is SA still the best option?
Well, based on their experiments, it seems like a pretty solid default choice. Figure 3 shows that it leads to reliable and efficient convergence across a variety of problems.
So sticking with the car analogy, it's like finding the optimal starting point for our journey.
Exactly. But the authors aren't satisfied with just good enough. They introduce a new technique in section 5.3 called cooling heuristics to try and squeeze even more performance out of the algorithm.
Cooling heuristics. That sounds intriguing. What's the idea behind that?
It's all about dynamically adjusting the parameter during the algorithm's execution. Remember, LED is like the accelerator pedal. By gradually increasing it over time, they can help the algorithm avoid those pesky oscillations and converge more smoothly.
So instead of slamming on the accelerator, we're easing into a higher gear.
Precisely. They test two strategies, a linear increase and a logarithmic increase. Figure 4 shows the results. The cooling approach leads to improved stability and faster convergence, especially for problems prone to those oscillations we talked about earlier.
It's like finding the optimal acceleration profile for our car, ensuring a smooth and efficient ride.
Now, here's where things get really exciting. In section 5.4, they take their generalized FAST-KOM method out of the theoretical playground and apply it to two real-world problems: optimal transport and the geometric median problem.
Ah, this is where the rubber meets the road. Tell me more about this optimal transport problem.
Imagine you have a pile of sand that you need to move and reshape into a specific form. Optimal transport figures out the most efficient way to do that, minimizing the overall effort involved.
So it's about finding the optimal path or strategy for moving stuff around.
Precisely. The authors tackle a particular version of this problem known as the Beckman minimal flow problem, which involves finding the flow of material that minimizes a certain cost function.
Okay, and how does the generalized FAST-KLM method fare in this real-world challenge?
They use algorithm 2, the one tailored for splitting methods, and the results are pretty impressive. The left side of figure 5 shows that with a small value and the cooling heuristics in place, the generalized FAST-KLM method outperforms the standard Krasnosel'kĉi method.
So it's not just a theoretical improvement. It actually makes a difference in practical scenarios. That's great to see. Now, what about that geometric median problem?
The geometric median is like finding the center of a set of points in a way that minimizes the total distance to all those points. It has applications in a ton of different fields, from location planning to data analysis.
So it's like finding the most central meeting point for a group of people, taking everyone's location into account.
Exactly. And for this problem, they use the graph DRS method that we discussed earlier.
And once again, algorithm 2 proves its worth.
You bet. The right side of figure 5 shows that, once again, a smaller value, and the cooling heuristics lead to faster and more stable convergence. It's a solid confirmation of the practical benefits of these generalizations.
It's amazing to see how these abstract mathematical ideas can translate into such tangible improvements in real-world applications.
It really speaks to the power of mathematical research to drive innovation across different fields.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to see how these theoretical advancements can actually make a real difference in solving practical problems.
It is, isn't it? This whole paper really highlights the importance of pushing the boundaries of optimization techniques, both in theory and in practice.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, where do you see this research leading? What are some of the potential future directions or applications that you're most excited about?
Well, I think this work opens up a lot of exciting avenues for future research. One area I'm particularly interested in is how these techniques could be applied to even more complex optimization problems, especially in fields like machine learning.
Yeah, machine learning is a hotbed for optimization challenges. Can you give us some specific examples?
Definitely. Think about training deep neural networks, for instance. These models can have millions, even billions of parameters, and finding the optimal values for all those parameters is a computationally massive undertaking. The faster and more efficient our optimization algorithms are, the faster we can train these models and unlock new capabilities in AI.
That makes a lot of sense. And beyond machine learning, any other fields where you see this research having a big impact?
Oh, absolutely. Signal processing is another area that comes to mind. Think about tasks like image denoising or compressed sensing. These problems often involve solving large-scale optimization problems, and the techniques developed in this paper could lead to significant improvements in both speed and accuracy.
So it's really about pushing the boundaries of what's computationally possible in a wide range of applications.
Exactly. And it's not just about speed. The flexibility and robustness of the generalized FAST-KLM method, especially with those clever additions like the cooling heuristics, make it well suited for tackling a wider variety of problems that might have been too challenging for previous methods.
It's like they've given us a new set of tools for tackling those tough optimization challenges.
And like any good set of tools, it will be interesting to see how researchers use them to build and create new things. The authors also point to some intriguing open questions that could spark further research.
You're referring to those questions about the Hessian-driven damping and the restrictions on TILA, right?
Yeah. Exploring those questions could lead to even deeper insights and further advancements in algorithm design. There's still so much we don't know, and that's what makes this field so exciting.
It's a reminder that even with all these advancements, there's always more to discover and explore.
Exactly. That's the beauty of scientific inquiry. It's an ongoing process of discovery and innovation.
Well said. This has been a truly enlightening deep dive. Thank you so much for taking the time to walk us through this fascinating paper and share your insights.
My pleasure. It's always great to discuss these topics with someone who appreciates the elegance and power of mathematics.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on another deep dive into the world of research. We hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, keep exploring and stay curious. Hey there. Ready for some math? We're going deep today into a way to make algorithms faster. The generalized fast Krasnosel'kĉi method.
It really is like giving your algorithms a boost. Like suddenly they can solve problems much faster.
Exactly. It's like adding a turbocharger.
Yeah.
So before we get into the nitty-gritty, can you remind us what problem this method is actually trying to solve?
Well, the core problem is finding what are called fixed points. These are points where everything in a system sort of settles down. They're like equilibrium points.
Okay, so these fixed points are where things stop changing.
Exactly. And these fixed points show up all over the place. Like in machine learning, if you're trying to find the best settings for a model, you're often searching for a fixed point.
And in economics?
Oh, absolutely. In economics, fixed points can represent things like market equilibrium, where supply and demand balance out, or even stable states in game theory.
So the faster we find these fixed points, the faster we can solve all sorts of real problems. So tell me, how does this generalized fast Krasnosel'k'i method work?
Well, it all starts with a continuous time model. It's described in equation 2.1. This equation shows how a system changes over time, always moving towards a fixed point.
So it's like watching a ball rolling down a hill. Eventually it settles at the bottom. That bottom point would be our fixed point.
Yes. Exactly. And what's interesting about this model is that it includes this parameter, bt. You can see it defined in equation 2.2. And this parameter gives us more control over how the system behaves.
Ah, so bt is like a tuning knob.
Exactly. Now, to track how close we are to the fixed point, we use what's called an energy function.
Okay, an energy function, like a fuel gauge.
Yes. It tells us how far we are from the solution. And as the system evolves, this energy should decrease. It's like watching the potential energy of that ball rolling down the hill. As it gets closer to the bottom, its potential energy decreases.
But we want to make sure this energy function is always decreasing. That way we know we're getting closer to the solution.
Precisely. To guarantee that the energy keeps decreasing, we introduce a growth condition on the parameter. It's shown in equation 2.6. Basically, this condition puts a limit on how fast can grow. It ensures that the energy keeps going down smoothly and steadily.
So it's like a safety mechanism. It keeps things from going haywire.
Exactly. Now, so far, we've been talking about a continuous model, right? But computers don't work in continuous time. They work in discrete steps.
So how do we go from the smooth, continuous world to the clunky, discrete world of computers?
That's where algorithm 1 comes in. It's a step-by-step process, a discrete time version of the continuous model. It's like taking snapshots of the continuous process at specific intervals.
Ah, so we're discretizing the continuous flow.
Precisely. And this discrete algorithm is something we can easily implement on a computer.
Makes sense. Now, I noticed that when we set a specific parameter in algorithm 1 alpha equals 2, we end up with a familiar method, the optimal Halpern method, or OHM.
Yes. You're absolutely right. Setting alpha to 2 in our algorithm gives us equation 3.7, and that's exactly the formula for the optimal Halpern method. It's amazing to see this connection between two seemingly different approaches.
It's like they're two sides of the same coin.
Exactly. Now, the paper also talks about these degenerate preconditioners. It sounds kind of scary, but they're actually very useful.
Degenerate preconditioners.
Yes, they're like shortcuts. Even though they might seem to make things more complex at first, they actually exploit certain properties of the problem to speed things up.
Interesting. So they're like hidden pathways that lead to the solution faster.
Exactly. And to analyze how these degenerate preconditioners affect convergence, we use a special tool. It's a modified version of Ophiol's lemma. It's lemma 4.2.
Ophiol's lemma.
It's a way to prove that an algorithm converges even when things are not perfectly smooth or well-behaved. It's like having a special magnifying glass. That lets us see convergence even in messy situations.
So it helps us analyze those tricky cases.
Precisely. And this modified Ophiol's lemma, it's essential for proving that our algorithm still converges correctly, even when we use these degenerate preconditioners.
So it's like a guarantee that these shortcuts won't lead us astray.
Exactly. All right, so we've talked about the big picture. Now let's zoom in on the proofs.
Yeah, let's get into the nitty-gritty of the math. I'm right.
Great. So the first lemma we'll look at is lemma 2.1. This is like the foundation for proving convergence in continuous time. It tells us how the energy function changes over time.
Okay, so lemma 2.1 is all about tracking that energy, making sure it's always going down.
Exactly. So the proof starts by taking the derivative of the energy function. We use something called the Leibniz rule. This gives us a bunch of terms. Some involve the operator q, some involve the trajectory xt and its velocity.
So it's like we're breaking down the energy function into its individual parts, seeing how each one contributes.
Precisely. Then we cleverly rearrange these terms. We use the fact that q is monotone, and we also use the definition of bt, which, remember, depends on our new parameter eta.
We're basically massaging the equation using all the information we have about the system.
Right. And through these manipulations, We end up with an expression that shows the derivative of the energy function is negative, as long as that growth condition holds.
So that negative derivative, that's what guarantees the energy is always decreasing. We're always getting closer to the fixed point.
Exactly. Now, the next lemma, lemma 3.3, is similar, but it focuses on the discrete time algorithm.
So it's like the discrete version of lemma 2.1.
Yes. It's the same idea, but adapted to the discrete world. The proof is also similar, but there are some key differences. Instead of derivatives, we now work with finite differences. These represent the changes between consecutive steps in the algorithm.
It's like analyzing the movement of a car by looking at its position every second, instead of continuously tracking its speed.
Perfect analogy. And to differentiate the energy function, we use the discrete Leibniz rule. It's like the regular Leibniz rule, but for discrete steps.
So we're adjusting our mathematical tools to fit the discrete setting.
Exactly. We get a bunch of terms involving finite differences of q, z, and v. These are the discrete counterparts to q, x, and y.
Okay, so we're essentially replacing the continuous variables with their discrete versions.
Exactly. Then we use the discrete time update rule from equation 3.4 to rewrite the finite difference of v. It's like connecting the dots between those discrete snapshots.
We need to see how things change from one step to the next.
Precisely. And just like in the continuous case, we rearrange the terms carefully. We use tools like the non-expansiveness of T and Young's inequality to keep everything under control.
We don't want those small errors to mess things up.
Right. And after all these manipulations, we arrive at an expression that shows the finite difference of the energy function is negative, just like in the continuous case.
So whether we're in continuous time or discrete time, that energy keeps going down. It's
Wow.
really reassuring.
Absolutely. It's a testament to the power of these mathematical principles. Now, these two lemmas, they set the stage for the main convergence theorems.
So lemma 2.1 and 3.3 are like the building blocks.
Exactly. Theorem 2.2 is for the continuous system, and theorem 3.4 is for the discrete algorithm.
And these theorems tell us that we actually reach the fixed point, right?
Yes. Theorem 2.2 says that as time goes to infinity, the trajectory xt converges to a point where q is 0. It's like saying the ball eventually reaches the bottom of the hill and stays there.
It reaches equilibrium.
Exactly. The proof of this theorem uses lemma 2.1 in a very clever way. We choose the parameter lambda carefully to get bounds on certain quantities. This helps us show that xt really does converge to the fixed point.
So lambda is like a tuning parameter. We adjust it to make the proof work.
Precisely. Now, theorem 3.4 is the discrete version. It says that the sequence generated by our algorithm xk, it converges to a fixed point of t.
So it's the same idea as theorem 2.2, but in the discrete world.
Yes. The proof is also similar. We use lemma 3.3 to show that the energy decreases at each step. And we also use a discrete version of Ophiol's lemma.
So Ophiol's lemma comes into play again.
It's a very powerful tool. And both of these theorems, they not only prove convergence, they also tell us something about how fast the algorithm converges.
So it's not just about getting there. It's also about getting there quickly.
Exactly. Both theorems contain statements about the convergence rate, often expressed using this little o notation.
Little o notation.
Yeah.
That's a way of describing how quickly something approaches 0.
Exactly. And the proofs of these theorems, they involve some clever arguments to establish those convergence rates.
It's like we're analyzing the speed of that car as it goes down the hill.
Exactly. And the choice of lambda also plays a role here. We need to choose it carefully to get the best possible bounds on the convergence rate.
So it's all about finding the right balance.
Precisely. These proofs, they're not just about proving that the algorithm works, they also provide deep insights into how it works and how to make it work better.
It's like we're not just building a car, we're also fine-tuning the engine to get the best performance.
Exactly. It's a beautiful blend of theory and practice.
All right, so we've seen the proofs. We know this method works. But let's see it in action. The paper has some numerical experiments, right?
Yes, they actually do quite a few. They wanted to see how those parameters E and SA affect the performance.
So it's like fine-tuning a race car, tweaking the engine to get the best speed.
Exactly. The first set of experiments focused on E. They tried different values, from close to 0 to almost 1.
And what did they find?
Well, they found that sometimes a smaller E actually makes the algorithm converge faster, especially for problems with primal dual operators.
That's interesting. But I remember we talked about a trade-off, right? Smaller E might speed up some things, but it could slow down others.
You've got a great memory.
Yes.
That's absolutely true. It all depends on the specific problem we're trying to solve. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
So what about psi? What did they learn about that parameter?
Well, it's connected to the starting time in the continuous model. So the experiments were all about finding the best starting point. It's like choosing the right moment to launch the race car.
And it seems that setting equal to a want often worked well.
Exactly. It's like synchronizing the launch with the engine's power. But again, it's important to experiment. Sometimes a different sus might be better.
Now, one thing I found really interesting was the cooling heuristics.
Cooling heuristics. It sounds like something you do to a computer processor.
Well, it's kind of similar. Instead of keeping I, we gradually increase it as the algorithm runs.
Ah, so it's like starting slow and then gradually accelerating.
Precisely. This helps to stabilize the algorithm, especially when a large I grow would cause problems.
Makes sense, like preventing the race car from spinning out of control.
And the experiments showed that this cooling trick can really boost convergence speed.
Especially when combined with a well-chosen IA.
It's all about finding the right combination of speed and stability. Now, the paper also applied this method to some real-world problems, right?
Yes, they looked at optimal transport and the geometric medium problem.
Optimal transport. That sounds pretty complex.
It is. It's about finding the most efficient way to move things around. It has applications in logistics, economics, even image processing.
Wow. So it's like figuring out the best delivery routes, or maybe matching organ donors with recipients?
Exactly. And the geometric median problem is about finding a central point that minimizes the total distance to a set of other points.
So like finding the perfect spot for a warehouse to serve multiple stores?
Precisely. And in both of these problems, the generalized fast KRASNOSEL'KɁi method performed really well.
Beat out the competition.
It did. It showed that by carefully tuning those parameters, yun and tus, we can get significant improvements in efficiency.
That's fantastic. So we've covered a lot of ground today. We started with the theory, the proofs that guarantee this method works, and then we saw how it performs in practice, both in simulations and real-world problems.
It's been quite a journey, and I think it shows the power of mathematics to solve complex problems.
Exactly. It's been fascinating to see how these abstract concepts can be translated to practical tools that make a real difference. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the generalized fast Krasnosel'k'i method. It's a powerful technique with a lot of potential, and I'm excited to see what researchers do with it in the future. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep exploring the fascinating world of algorithms. Hey there, ready for another deep dive?
Always ready to plunge into some fascinating research.
Well, today we've got a paper that's, it's pretty dense, I'm not going to lie.
Oh, sounds intriguing already.
It's called Generalized Fast Krasnosel'k'i Method with Preconditioners.
Okay, I'm familiar with Krasnosel'k'i, of course, a classic in the world of fixed-point problems.
Right. But these authors, Booth, CHENCHENE, and FADILI, they really take it to another level.
So we're talking accelerated algorithms then?
Yeah, accelerated, generalized, the whole works. We're going to be wading through continuous time dynamics, discrete algorithms, even Lyapunov functions, all that good stuff.
It sounds like a challenging but rewarding deep dive.
Oh, absolutely. So maybe before we get too deep into the weeds here, let's start with a kind of a basic question.
Always a good place to begin.
What exactly is a fixed point problem? For those who might not be, totally up on the lingo.
Sure. At its core, a fixed point problem is about finding a special point that doesn't move when you apply a certain function to it. We call that function an operator sometimes.
Okay, so it's like a point that's kind of immune to the function in a way.
Exactly. It stays put no matter how many times you apply the function.
Interesting. And how does this fixed point idea, how does that connect to optimization? I mean, I always thought optimization was about finding like the minimum of a function.
Ah, you're right. Optimization is all about finding those minimums. But here's the cool part. Finding the minimum often boils down to finding points where the gradient of the function is 0.
Okay, the gradient, that's the direction of steepest descent, right?
You got it. And those 0 gradient points, they can be formulated as fixed points.
But it's like by solving a fixed point problem, we're essentially finding the bottom of the valley, so to speak.
Precisely. They're two sides of the same coin, really.
Fascinating. And I know, there are classic algorithms like Nesterov's method that are used for optimization. Do those tie into this fixed point world as well?
Absolutely. Nesterov's method, it's a famous accelerated algorithm, and it can definitely be viewed through this fixed point lens.
Accelerated. That seems to be a key word here. Why the need for speed? Why aren't standard methods good enough?
Well, think about the scale of problems we're dealing with these days. Machine learning, image processing, huge data sets. Standard algorithms can be, well, a bit slow for those kinds of tasks.
Yeah, I could see that. Time is precious, especially when you're dealing with, mountains of data.
Exactly. That's where these accelerated methods shine. They can significantly reduce the time it takes to find those solutions.
Okay, so this paper focuses on two main acceleration techniques, inertial and anchoring. Those sound almost, I don't know, physical.
They do, don't they? Inertial acceleration, it's like giving our algorithm some momentum. Instead of just taking small steps down the hill, it uses information from its previous steps to take bigger leaps.
Like it's remembering where it's been and using that to kind of propel itself forward.
Exactly. It's like a ball rolling down a hill. It doesn't stop at every bump. It keeps some of its speed.
And the paper, it uses a second-order differential equation to describe this, right? Equation 2.1. It's pretty intense.
It is a bit daunting at first glance. You've got Q, which represents our operator, the function that's mapping points to points.
Okay, so that's the kind of the rule that governs how things move around in our problem space.
Right. And then you've got alpha and beta. These are time-dependent coefficients. They control the damping and the inertial effects.
The damping, so like how much the algorithm slows down over time.
Yes, exactly. And beta controls how much memory the algorithm has of its past movements, so to speak.
Interesting. And what about B? The paper says it's like a carefully chosen parameter.
B is crucial for stability. It makes sure the algorithm doesn't overshoot the solution or get stuck in oscillations.
So it's like a stabilizing force, keeping everything on track.
Exactly, like a gentle hand guiding the algorithm toward the solution.
I see. Now, the paper talks about a specific case of this equation called fast OGDA. What's special about that one?
Fast OGDA. That stands for Fast Optimistic Gradient Descent Ascent. It's a special case that's tailored for saddle point problems.
Saddle point problems, those come up in game theory a lot, right?
Yes, exactly. Where you have two players, each trying to optimize their own objective.
Okay, so it's like fast OGDA is like a specialized tool for those kinds of competitive scenarios.
Precisely. It's a way to apply this general framework to those specific types of problems.
Got it. Now, I'm seeing mentions of a Lyapunov energy function. What is that all about? It sounds kind of mysterious.
It's a clever tool, that's for sure. A Lyapunov function, it's like an energy landscape for our algorithm.
An energy landscape. So like a topographical map?
Sort of. We use it to show that the energy of the system decreases over time, eventually leading us to a stable equilibrium point.
And that stable equilibrium point, that's the solution to our fixed point problem.
Exactly. It's where the algorithm finally settles down, having found the answer.
I like that, the energy landscape analogy.
Yeah.
And the paper, it gives a specific Lyapunov function, right? Equation 2.3.
Yes. That equation defines the energy function for this particular framework. It's a bit complicated, but the key takeaway is that it's always non-negative.
Non-negative, so it can't go below zero.
Right. And its derivative, it can be shown to be negative under certain conditions.
So that means the energy is always decreasing. Like a ball rolling down a hill, it can't suddenly roll back uphill.
Exactly. The decreasing energy guides the algorithm toward that stable point, toward the solution.
And there's a specific growth condition for beta, right? Equation 2.6. What's that all about?
That condition, it ensures that the energy decrease happens at the right pace. Not too fast, not too slow.
Like a Goldilocks condition for the energy function.
You could say that. It's all about finding the right balance for optimal convergence.
Makes sense. Now, Theorem 2.2. This seems to be where the real convergence insights are.
Yes, this theorem gives us the conditions under which the system will converge to a solution. And it tells us how fast that convergence will be.
Okay, so it's not just about will it converge, but how quickly will it get there?
Exactly. We're talking about big O and little o notation here.
Big O and little o. I always get those mixed up.
Think of big O as an upper bound on the convergence rate. It tells you the error will decrease at least as fast as a certain rate.
Okay, so it's like a worst-case scenario for how long it might take.
You could say that. Now, little o, that's even more exciting. It gives you a stricter bound, saying the error decays even faster than that rate.
So it's like not only is the algorithm guaranteed to converge, but it's going to do it really, really quickly.
Precisely.
Okay, I'm starting to see why those little O rates are so desirable.
It's all about efficiency. The faster the convergence, the better.
Absolutely. Now, the theorem also mentions integral bounds. What's the significance of those?
Those are important for proving something called weak convergence of the trajectories.
Weak convergence. I'm not familiar with that term.
It's a bit more nuanced than regular convergence. Think of it like this. The trajectory might not converge in the traditional sense, but it will get arbitrarily close to the solution.
So it's like it's getting closer and closer, but maybe not hitting the bullseye perfectly.
Exactly. And those integral bounds, they help us control certain quantities over time to make sure everything stays well behaved.
I see. So they like safeguards to make sure the algorithm doesn't, veer off course completely.
Precisely. They keep everything on track, even in those tricky weak convergence scenarios.
Fascinating. And there's this interesting connection to Tikhonov regularization mentioned in remark 2.3. What's that all about?
Tikhonov regularization, that's a powerful technique for dealing with ill-posed problems. Problems where, small changes in the input can lead to huge variations in the output.
So it's like a way to stabilize things, make the problem more well-behaved.
Exactly. And the remark points out that under certain conditions, this generalized framework can be seen as a form of Tikhonov regularization.
Wow, so it's like two seemingly different concepts actually have this underlying connection.
It's one of those beautiful moments where different areas of math come together.
I love those moments. It's like, seeing the interconnectedness of everything.
Exactly. And these connections, they often lead to deeper insights and new avenues for research.
Okay, so we've been talking about the continuous time system and its convergence. But at the end of the day, we need something we can actually implement on a computer, right?
Of course. And that's where algorithm 1 comes in. It's the discrete time version of all these continuous ideas.
So it's like taking those elegant flowing concepts and turning them into a set of step-by-step instructions.
Precisely. Algorithm 1 takes those continuous ideas and translates them into a practical procedure that can be executed on a computer.
I see. And how does it connect to those inertial and anchoring ideas we were talking about earlier?
The algorithm involves updating two sequences. One is xk, which is our current estimate of the fixed point. The other is zik, an auxiliary sequence that helps accelerate the process.
Okay, two sequences working together to kind of home in on the solution.
Exactly. And the way they're combined, the weights used in each iteration, those are directly inspired by the coefficients in the continuous system.
So it's like those coefficients alpha and beta, they're kind of baked into the algorithm's steps.
You got it. They control how much memory the algorithm has of its past movements, how much momentum it carries forward.
That's really clever. And remark 3.1, it mentions that this algorithm is a generalization of a previously proposed fast algorithm. What's new and improved in this version?
This generalized version introduces a new parameter, sigma. It adds another layer of flexibility, allowing us to fine-tune the algorithm for a wider range of problems.
So it's like having an extra control knob to optimize the performance even further. Now, we also have a discrete time energy function, equation 3.8. How does that relate to the continuous version, and why is it important?
It plays the same role as the continuous one, tracking a quantity that decreases over iterations, guiding us toward the fixed point.
So it's like a discrete version of that energy landscape we were talking about.
Exactly. But instead of derivatives, it uses finite differences because we're dealing with discrete steps now.
I see. And why is it so important that this energy function be non-negative?
Because if it could go negative, it could potentially oscillate forever, never settling down. The non-negativity ensures that the energy keeps decreasing, pushing us toward convergence.
Okay, so it's like a guarantee that the algorithm will eventually, find its way to the solution.
Precisely.
Now, theorem 3.4, this looks like the discrete counterpart to theorem 2.2. What does it tell us about algorithm 1?
It gives us the conditions under which the algorithm will converge. And just like before, it provides those big O and little o convergence rates.
So we're still achieving those super fast convergence speeds, even in the discrete world.
Yes, which is fantastic news. It means we can translate those theoretical guarantees into practical algorithms.
That's what I like to hear. The theorem also mentions summability properties. What are those all about?
Think of them as the discrete equivalent of those integral bounds we discussed earlier. They ensure certain quantities related to the error shrink quickly enough over iterations.
Okay, so they're kind of like the discrete versions of those safeguards, making sure the algorithm stays on track.
Exactly.
Wow, it's a lot to take in, but it's really fascinating to see how everything connects, how the continuous and the discrete worlds, kind of mirror each other.
It's a beautiful illustration of how mathematical ideas can be translated into practical algorithms.
Absolutely. And we've only scratched the surface. There's still more to explore, like those degenerate preconditioners. But I think we'll save that for part 2 of our deep dive.
Sounds good to me. We've covered a lot of ground already.
We have. But it's been an exciting journey so far. I'm really looking forward to diving into the next part.
Me too. There's so much more to uncover in this paper.
All right, welcome back to our deep dive.
I'm ready for more.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around all those continuous time dynamics.
Oh, they're a bit mind-bending at times, that's for sure.
But now we're moving on to even trickier terrain, right? Degenerate preconditioners.
Ah, yes, those. They're quite powerful tools.
But from what I gather, they're not exactly easy to work with.
They do require a bit more care, that's true. You see, standard preconditioners, they're like well-behaved assistants. They help us transform a problem into a form that's easier to solve.
Okay, so they're like simplifying things, making the path smoother.
Precisely. But degenerate preconditioners, they're a bit more mischievous. They introduce a certain singularity that can make the problem seem, well, more complicated at first glance.
Singularity, that sounds ominous.
Imagine you're walking on a perfectly smooth surface. Then suddenly you hit a patch of ice. You have to be more careful with your steps.
Yeah, you could slip and slide, lose your footing.
That's kind of what it's like with degenerate preconditioners. They create these slippery areas in the problem landscape. So we need a more nuanced approach to navigate them.
So how do we even begin to deal with these slippery preconditioners?
Well, the paper introduces some clever tools. We start with precondition resolvents, defined in equation 4.1.
Equation 4.1. It's looks pretty intense.
It is a bit dense, yes, but essentially it's a way to modify the operator we're working with, taking into account the structure introduced by the degenerate preconditioner.
So it's like adjusting our vision to see clearly even in those slippery areas.
Exactly. We need to adapt our perspective to handle those singularities.
And then there's this talk of quotient space operations. Now that's getting a bit abstract for me.
It is a bit abstract, but it's a powerful way to deal with these degenerate preconditioners. Think of it as factoring out the troublesome parts of the problem, leaving us with a simpler, more manageable structure.
So it's like strategically simplifying the problem to make it more tractable.
Exactly. By working in this quotient space, we can focus on the essential aspects and avoid getting bogged down by those singularities.
Now, the paper uses an example with the Douglas-Ratchford splitting method. What's special about this example?
The Douglas-Ratchford method, it's a classic algorithm for solving optimization problems where the objective function can be split into 2 parts. It's a divide and conquer approach.
Okay, break it down, tackle each piece separately.
Exactly. But sometimes the splitting isn't so clean. There might be some overlap or dependencies between the parts. That's where degenerate preconditioners come in.
They help us deal with those messy, overlapping situations.
They help us create a more structured environment so the Douglas-Ratchford method can work its magic even in those more challenging scenarios.
Okay, so it's like creating order out of chaos, so to speak.
You could say that. And to prove convergence in this setting, we turn to, you guessed it, Ophiol's lemma, but this time it's the degenerate version.
Degenerate Ophiol's lemma. Lemma 4.2. Another one of those slightly intimidating names.
It might sound daunting, but it's essentially an adaptation of the classic Ophiol's lemma, tailored for these situations with degenerate preconditioners.
So it's like upgrading our tools to handle this new slippery terrain.
Precisely. Lemma 4.2 gives us the necessary modifications to prove convergence even when those pesky singularities are present.
It's all about adapting and evolving our tools to match the challenges, right?
Exactly. Mathematics is all about finding the right tools for the job.
And then comes Theorem 4.3, the culmination of all this work with degenerate preconditioners.
Ah, yes. This is a key result. It shows that even with those degenerate preconditioners, we can still achieve fast convergence.
That's amazing. So we're not sacrificing speed, even though we're dealing with these more complicated situations?
Not at all. And it's not just about achieving convergence, it's about achieving it efficiently.
Right. Those little o convergence rates, those are still there.
They are. Theorem 4.3 guarantees those impressive rates, even in the presence of degenerate preconditioners.
I'm really starting to appreciate the power of this framework. It's like it can handle anything we throw at it.
That's the beauty of it. It's robust, it's adaptable, and it's efficient.
Now, the paper doesn't just stop at the theory, right? It actually introduces a specific algorithm, algorithm 2.
Yes. This is where the rubber meets the road. Algorithm 2, it's called the graph DRS accelerator.
Okay, so it's building on those previous ideas, specifically using those degenerate preconditioners.
Exactly. And it's tailored for problems that involve graphs or networks.
Networks, so like social networks or transportation networks, things like that.
Precisely. Systems where you have interconnected components, relationships between different elements. Degenerate preconditioners, they allow us to represent these constraints in a very convenient way.
So it's like they're capturing the essence of those interconnected relationships.
You got it. And algorithm 2, it uses these preconditioners to efficiently find solutions that satisfy those constraints across the entire network.
That's incredibly powerful. It's like solving a puzzle where all the pieces are connected, and you have to find a solution that works for everything at once.
It's a very apt analogy. And of course, we need to make sure this algorithm actually converges. That's where proposition 4.6 comes in.
Okay, so it's providing those convergence guarantees for this graph DRS accelerator.
It does. Under appropriate conditions, proposition 4.6 assures us that algorithm 2 will converge to a solution. And it does so with the same impressive speed guarantees we've seen before.
So we're not losing any efficiency, even though we're dealing with these complex network problems.
Not at all. The framework remains robust and efficient, even in these more challenging settings.
I'm constantly amazed by how this paper just keeps pushing the boundaries. You know, it's like we can keep encountering these seemingly insurmountable obstacles, and then boom, there's a theorem or a lemma or an algorithm that just elegantly overcomes them.
It's a testament to the power of mathematical ingenuity. There's always a way forward, even when the path seems uncertain.
It's inspiring, really. It makes me want to dive even deeper into these mathematical mysteries.
That's the spirit. There's a whole world of mathematical wonders out there just waiting to be discovered.
Now, I know the paper doesn't just stop at the theory and the algorithms. There are numerical experiments too, right?
Yes, of course. We need to see how these algorithms actually perform in practice. That's coming up next in the final part of our deep dive.
I can't wait. It's always exciting to see those theoretical ideas come to life.
Me too. The numerical experiments, they provide a glimpse into the real-world potential of these mathematical tools.
Okay, so we've laid all this groundwork, the theory, the algorithms, those slippery preconditioners. Now it's time to see how it all plays out in practice.
Right, the numerical experiments, always an exciting part.
Yeah, it's like taking our finely tuned machine for a test ride, see how it performs on the open road.
Exactly. And in this paper, they really put those algorithms through their paces, exploring all sorts of different scenarios.
So they really wanted to understand how those different parameters and problem characteristics, how those all interact, right?
Absolutely. They wanted to get a sense of how robust and adaptable the algorithms are in different environments.
Makes sense. So they started by looking at the influence of those key parameters, eta and sigma.
Right, those control knobs we were talking about earlier. They wanted to see how different settings would affect the convergence speed.
And what did they find? I mean, did they find that, certain values worked better than others?
They did, actually. For instance, they found that choosing eta values smaller than 1/2, those often led to faster convergence, especially when dealing with those tricky primal dual gaps.
Primal dual gaps, those are always a bit of a headache, aren't they?
They can be, yes. Remember, we often have this primal problem, the original problem we want to solve, and then we have this dual problem, which is kind of like a mirror image of the primal.
Right, like two sides of the same coin.
Exactly. And the primal dual gap, that measures the difference between the solutions to those two problems. We want that gap to be as small as possible.
So we want them to kind of converge, to match up as closely as possible.
Precisely. And by choosing smaller eta values, the algorithm seems to close that gap more efficiently.
Okay, so it's like taking smaller, more careful steps to make sure we're not, overshooting the target.
That's a good way to think about it. Sometimes slower and steadier wins the race.
Interesting. And what about sigma? Did they find any optimal settings for that parameter?
Well, they confirm the intuition that setting sigma equal to alpha generally led to good performance.
So it's like finding the right balance between speed and stability.
Exactly. We want the algorithm to accelerate towards the solution, but we also want it to stay grounded, not veer off in the wrong direction.
Makes sense. And those findings are all illustrated really nicely in figures 1-3 of the paper, right?
Yes, those figures show how different parameter combinations affect the convergence curves. It's a great visual representation of how those choices impact the algorithm's behavior.
Yeah, I always appreciate a good graph. to really bring those numbers to life.
Absolutely. They can be incredibly insightful.
Okay, so they explored those key parameters, but they also looked at those cooling heuristics we talked about earlier, right?
They did. They wanted to see how gradually adjusting alpha during the algorithm's execution, how that would affect performance.
Right. So it's like starting with a gentle nudge and then gradually increasing the pressure as we get closer to the solution.
Exactly. It's a way to fine-tune the algorithm's behavior over time to optimize convergence.
And did they find that these cooling heuristics were helpful?
They did, especially when using larger values of alpha. They saw significant improvements in both stability and convergence speed.
That's great news. So it's like finding another way to squeeze out even more efficiency.
Precisely. Every little bit helps when you're dealing with complex problems.
Absolutely. Now, of course, the real test is how all of this performs on real-world problems.
Right. We can't just stay in the theoretical realm forever.
So they applied this framework to a couple of specific problems, right? Optimal transport and the geometric median problem.
It did. Those are two very different problems, but both very important in various applications.
Yeah, optimal transport, that's all about finding the most efficient way to move stuff around, right?
Yes, it's about finding the optimal way to match supply and demand, essentially. It has applications in logistics, image processing, even machine learning.
Wow, so it's a very versatile problem.
It is, and it can get very complex very quickly.
And the geometric median problem, what is that all about?
That one involves finding a point that minimizes the sum of distances to a set of other points. It's like finding the most central location among a group of points.
Okay, so like finding the best spot for a central hub that serves multiple locations.
Exactly. It has applications in facility location, clustering algorithms, all sorts of things.
Interesting. And so they tested algorithm 2, that graph DRS accelerator, on both of these problems.
They did. They wanted to see how it would perform in these real-world settings.
And what did they find? Did it live up to the hype?
It did. In both cases, algorithm 2 outperformed traditional methods. The results were quite impressive.
That's fantastic. So it's not just a theoretical curiosity. It actually works in practice.
It does, and that's always the ultimate goal, right? To develop tools that can make a real difference in the world.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a truly fascinating deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much about these accelerated algorithms, from the theoretical foundations to the practical implementations.
Me too. It's been a great journey.
It really highlights the power of mathematics, to not only understand the world, but to actually improve it.
I completely agree. And it's just the tip of the iceberg, really. There's so much more to explore in this field.
That's what makes it so exciting, right? There's always something new to discover, new challenges to overcome.
Exactly. And who knows what incredible breakthroughs are just around the corner.
I can't wait to find out. But for now, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
And until next time, keep those algorithms running. Welcome to another deep dive. Looks like today we'll be tackling accelerated fixed-point algorithms.
Yeah, specifically, generalized fast Krasnosel'kĉi Mann method with preconditioners. Bit of a mouthful.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
But fascinating stuff from what I've seen.
Absolutely. Huge implications for optimization and all sorts of numerical analysis problems.
Well, let's not waste any time then. Right into the thick of it. So the paper starts off right out of the gate talking about finding fixed points of non-expansive operators in a Hilbert space.
Right. Yep. And equation 1.1, that's like their foundational statement, setting the scene for everything that follows.
Okay, so can you break down what equation 1.1 is actually saying?
It's basically, we're looking for a point, call it x, where applying an operator t to it doesn't change the point. So t of x equals x.
I see. So a point that's sort of in equilibrium, it doesn't move when this operator acts on it.
Exactly. And as simple as that sounds, tons of mathematical problems can be framed this way.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, optimization, for one. Finding a minimum of a convex function, that's basically like finding a fixed point for a specific operator related to that function's gradient.
Ah, right, because at a minimum, the gradient is 0. So applying a gradient-based operator wouldn't change the point.
Precisely. And the authors, they're all about finding these points fast. That's where the whole accelerated part comes in.
Makes sense. Standard methods like plain old gradient descent, they can be slow, especially if you're in like a really high dimensional space.
Yeah, totally. So they bring up Nesterov's accelerated algorithm as an example. Classic fast method. They even connect it to a specific ODE in equation 1.2 to show how much faster it converges.
ODE, that's ordinary differential equation, right? For folks who might not be as familiar with the lingo.
Yep, exactly. But there's a catch. Turns out these accelerated methods, while faster, tend to oscillate as they converge.
Oscillate meaning?
Like imagine trying to hit a target. Instead of going straight there, you kind of overshoot, then swing back, overshoot again, back and forth until you finally settle.
Ah, I see. Not the most efficient approach, even if it's fast in the long run.
Right. So to deal with this, the authors introduce Hessian-driven damping, shown in equation 1.3.
Damping, so like adding some friction to the system to smooth out those oscillations.
Exactly. It helps it settle down faster. And the really cool thing is they don't just stick with optimization problems, they generalize this damping concept.
Oh, so it's not just for like finding minima function.
Nope. Equation 1.4, that's where they broaden it out. Now it works for monotone and Lipschitz continuous operators too.
Wait.
Way more general.
Opens up a lot more possibilities, I imagine. But how does that even relate back to finding fixed points?
Well, you can actually express the fixed point problem using these operators. You set Q equals I minus T, where I is the identity operator.
Clever. So by tackling these more general operators, they're kind of indirectly solving the fixed point problem too.
Exactly. And then they get even more clever. Equation 1.6, that's where they start messing with the parameter B in the fast OGDA system.
Fast OGDA, that's another algorithm, right?
Yeah, stands for Fast Optimized Gradient Descent. Ascent. Anyway, they introduce this new parameter E alongside B.
Adding another knob to tweak, essentially.
Precisely. Gives them a lot more flexibility in designing the algorithm.
So more control over how it behaves in different situations? Makes sense. But then they bring up Tikhonov regularization, calling it anchoring. What's that all about?
Yeah, it might seem like a jump, but it ties in really nicely. Think of anchoring as like, keeping the algorithm from drifting too far away from some reference point as it's searching for the solution.
Adding a bit of stability to the process.
Right, and with a specific choice of parameters, their generalized system becomes a form of Tikhonov regularization. That's what equation 1.7 shows.
Interesting. So they're connecting their work to this existing technique, anchoring.
Exactly. And they even relate it to Halpern's method, another big name in fixed point theory.
So it's like their method is kind of building upon these well-established foundations, but also pushing things further?
Absolutely. It's a really elegant blend of the old and the new, and it sets the stage for their main event, Algorithm 1.
Algorithm 1, the generalized fast Krasnosel'kĉi Mann method, right? The star of the show.
That's the one. And this is where theory gets put into practice, a concrete set of steps to actually implement all these fancy ideas.
So like a recipe for the computer to follow, taking those continuous concepts and making them discrete and computable.
Yep. And they've made it much easier to implement than, say, discretizing fast OGDA directly. More user-friendly, if you will.
I like user-friendly algorithms, but parameters, they're back again, right? Still playing a role in this algorithm.
You bet. Still providing that fine-tuning control we talked about. But the authors don't stop there. They also explore this thing called the degenerate setting. Sounds a bit ominous, no?
Degenerate setting, huh? What's that all about?
It's basically when the operators involved aren't so well-behaved. Might be more difficult to work with.
Like those tricky math problems that don't play nice with the usual rules.
Right. So they introduce degenerate preconditioners, special tools to help the algorithm handle those cases.
So it's like they're giving us a more rugged version of the algorithm ready for tough terrain.
Exactly. To understand this setting, though, they get into some pretty heavy-duty math. Things like precondition resolvence, monotonicity, memcocoercivity, all defined in equations 4.1 through 4.3.
Definitely getting into the weeds here. But hey, that's what a deep dive is for, right?
Absolutely. And they connect it back to more familiar stuff like proximal point algorithms, so it's not all completely alien.
Good to have some familiar landmarks along the way. But how do they even prove things converge in this degenerate world? Doesn't sound easy.
Well, that's where the degenerate Opio lemma comes in, lemma 4.2. Crucial tool for proving convergence when things get messy.
Sounds like a powerful lemma, keeping everything on track even in this more challenging setting.
It is. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We've covered a lot of ground already. Before we dive into the convergence analysis, maybe a quick recap.
Yeah, good idea. So we started with the basic idea of fixed points, saw how to accelerate finding them, and then got into this whole world of generalization, making it applicable to way more than just, say, basic optimization. Now we've got this algorithm 1 ready to handle even those degenerate situations. Quite a journey so far.
It is, and we haven't even scratched the surface of the actual convergence proof yet. That's where things get really interesting.
Well, I'm all ears, ready for part 2 of this mathematical adventure. Okay, so last time we left off with this algorithm 1, the generalized, fast Krasnosel'k'i Mann method. Ready to tackle how they prove this thing actually converges.
You bet. This is where the continuous and discrete worlds really start to mesh together.
Okay, so how do they bridge that gap? Continuous systems, they evolve smoothly over time. Algorithms, they jump in discrete steps.
Right, so they introduce these sequences like SK, K, and USK defined in equation 3.1. They're kind of like snapshots of the continuous flow taken at specific times.
Ah, so they're discretizing the continuous system in a way that captures the important bits.
Exactly. Like, you know, turning an analog signal into a digital one. You lose some detail, but if you sample it right, you still get the overall picture.
And this lets them analyze the algorithm using tools from continuous mathematics.
You got it. Specifically Lyapunov functions. They're like this mathematical tool that helps us understand stability.
Stability meaning?
Like, does the system eventually settle down, reach a steady state, or does it just, you know, keep bouncing around forever?
Ah, right. So a Lyapunov function, it kind of tells us if things are heading towards that nice, stable equilibrium point.
Exactly. And they define a discrete version of this Lyapunov function, mirroring the one from the continuous world.
So it's like a guide, making sure the algorithm is on the right track, heading towards convergence.
Precisely. And this discrete energy function, it's defined in equation 3.8. It's a bit more complex than its continuous counterpart, has to account for all those discrete steps.
Makes sense. Discrete world, discrete energy function. But how do we know it actually does what it's supposed to? Like, how do we know this function actually decreases as the algorithm runs, guiding us towards convergence?
That's where lemma 3.3 comes in. This lemma is like the workhorse of the proof. It shows, through a bunch of careful manipulations, that this energy function does indeed decrease with each iteration.
So with every step, we're getting closer to our destination.
Exactly. And not only that, it quantifies how much it decreases, gives us a bound on the chain.
A bound, meaning?
Like, it can't decrease by more than this amount, gives us some control over the convergence rate.
So we're not just blindly hoping it converges. We actually have some guarantees on how fast they'll get there.
Exactly. And the proof of lemma 3.3, it's quite a ride. A lot of algebraic gymnastics using those discrete calculus rules we mentioned.
Okay, so to recap, we've got this discrete algorithm that mirrors the continuous system, a discrete energy function that's like our compass, and lemma 3.3 proving that this energy actually decreases, guiding us towards the solution. What's next?
Well, now comes the big payoff theorem 3.4. This theorem is the one that lays out all the convergence guarantees.
This is it. The moment of truth. So what does theorem 3.4 actually tell us?
Well, first off, it says that the fixed point residual, that's basically how far we are from the true solution, it decreases at a rate of OK1. Big O notation, remember?
Yeah, from our algorithm analysis days. So the error shrinks quickly as we do more iterations.
Yep. But there's more. Statement 2, that's where things get even more technical. It proves some summability properties of certain terms in the algorithm.
Summability, meaning?
Like, if you add up all those terms over time, the sum doesn't blow up to infinity. It stays nicely bounded.
So it's a way of saying these terms, even if they cause some initial hiccups, they eventually become insignificant as the algorithm keeps running.
Precisely. And then the climax statement, 3, that's the one that guarantees the algorithm actually finds a fixed point. It says the sequence generated by the algorithm converges weakly to a solution.
Weak convergence. So it's not just getting arbitrarily close. It actually converges to a genuine fixed point.
Exactly. It all comes together beautifully. We've got an algorithm, a way to track its progress, and now a theorem proving that this progress leads us to the solution.
And theorem 3.4 even gives us little O rates of convergence too, right?
Yep. That's statement 4. It means certain terms vanish even faster than that OK1 rate we talked about.
Like, it's not just converging, it's converging with style.
Yeah. And the proof of this theorem, it's a real masterpiece, but we've covered a lot already. Maybe we should save that for next time.
Yeah, good idea. Let's give folks some time to digest all this. But hey, I'm really impressed. Continuous time inspiration, discrete time implementation, and a solid proof to back it all up. This generalized, fast Krasnosel'k'i Mann method, it's the real deal.
It is. And we haven't even talked about the practical implications yet, all the cool problems we can solve with this thing.
Well, I'm excited to hear about those too. Next time then, the grand finale. Last time, we left off with this amazing Theorem 3.4, laying out all the convergence guarantees for this generalized, fast Krasnosel'kĉi Mann method. I'm ready to see how they actually prove it all.
All right, buckle up. It's going to be a fun ride. The proof itself, it's all about analyzing how this energy function we talked about changes with each step of the algorithm.
So we're not just saying it decreases, we're looking at the specifics of how it decreases, making sure it's heading in the right direction.
Exactly. They use this thing called the discrete Leibniz rule to break down the change in energy into smaller pieces. That's equation 6.5, if you're following along.
Equation 6.5, got it. It's pretty intense. So what's the game plan for tackling this equation?
Basically, a lot of clever rearranging and using some key inequalities. Like, they really massage those terms to show that the change in energy is always negative, or at least controlled in a way that guarantees will converge.
Okay, so even though the energy might fluctuate a bit as the algorithm runs, the overall trend is downwards towards that fixed point.
Right. One of the neat tricks they use is they isolate a specific quadratic form within that big equation. It's kind of like finding a hidden pattern within all the chaos.
A quadratic form meaning, sorry, my brain's still catching up.
No worries. It's basically an expression with squared terms. And the nice thing about them is we know a lot about how they behave.
So by bringing this quadratic form to the front, they can use its properties to control the energy changes.
Precisely. And to fine-tune things even further, they use Young's inequality. It's like a handy tool for making sure certain terms don't get too out of hand.
Young's inequality, check.
Yeah.
But with so many terms flying around, how do we keep track of everything? Doesn't it get confusing?
The authors do a really good job of organizing it all. They label key expressions, group terms together logically, so it's not just a jumbled mess.
Like they're giving us a guided tour through this complex mathematical landscape.
Yeah, exactly. And there are these moments in the proof where you're just like, wow, that's clever. Like they do this thing where they force a specific term to appear almost out of thin air.
So it's not just brute force calculation. It's like strategic maneuvering, using the math to their advantage.
Exactly. And they handle these other tricky terms, 2 and 3 they call them, in a way that ensures the energy stays bounded, keeps everything converging nicely.
It's amazing how they keep all these balls in the air, making sure everything works together to achieve that final goal of convergence.
It's a testament to how powerful mathematical analysis can be. And remember, this proof doesn't just show convergence, it gives us those specific rates we talked about before, the OK1 and the even faster little o rates.
Right. It's not just converging, it's converging efficiently. But we've been in the theoretical world for a while now. What about the practical side of things? What can we actually do with this algorithm?
Oh, tons of stuff. Optimization, for one. Finding those minima or maxima of functions, but way faster than traditional methods.
Okay, that's cool. Anything else?
Signal processing, machine learning, game theory, anything where you need to find fixed points, this algorithm can potentially speed things up.
This is pretty versatile. Any specific examples that stand out?
Yeah, they show how to apply it to graph Douglas-Ratchford splitting, which is used to solve these things called monotone inclusion problems.
Monotone inclusion problems, huh? Sounds a bit intimidating.
They sound fancy, but they pop up in a lot of practical areas, like image processing, compressed sensing, even resource allocation in networks.
Wow, so this algorithm, it's not just some abstract mathematical curiosity. It actually has the potential to solve real-world problems.
Absolutely. It's a great example of how theoretical advances can lead to practical breakthroughs.
Well, I gotta say, this deep dive has been a wild ride. We went from basic fixed points to this powerful general algorithm, saw how it's connected to both continuous and discrete math, and even got a glimpse of the intricate proof behind it all.
I agree. It's been a lot of fun exploring this with you. And hey, maybe our listener will be inspired to, build upon these ideas, come up with their own cool algorithms someday.
That would be fantastic. So to everyone listening, keep those mathematical minds churning. You never know what amazing discoveries are waiting to be made. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.